The next day, early in the morning, while the sun was illuminating everything, Lu Sheng approached the window and began to observe the landscape with a cheerful smile. Our boy activated his mental power, making the liquid inside the bucket gradually start to float. Lu Sheng extended his hand and all the liquid started to float in the air. He began to observe it and his eyes filled with determination. With a smile, he decided to try it. He opened his mouth and the liquid began to enter his mouth. In an instant, Lu Sheng drank all the liquid. Behind him was the bucket. Our boy's attention was fixed on it. With a surprised expression, he realized that this high-purity water was really good. He began to imagine a beautiful waterfall in the jungle. You see, this was the spiritual water with the highest purity in the world, coming from the depths of the northern mountain range of the Lion Kingdom. After being extracted, it had to go through more than 100 complex processes for its refinement. Just one bucket of this water could cost billions. Lu Sheng's eyes expanded with confidence. He had been submerged in the tube of spiritual marrow liquid for more than a year without ingesting any food, which in a certain sense could also be considered as a kind of fasting. He could not contain himself any longer and snapped his fingers. Some elegant waiters carrying delicious meat dishes opened the door and began to enter one after another. They filled Lu Sheng's table with delicious dishes of all kinds, from meat to croissants. Our boy grabbed the fork and knife and his gaze fixed on the food, his mouth watered. As eating meat always made him feel good. Our boy put down the fork and knife, grabbed a steak with his hands, and took a bite. His eyes closed, and a pleasant smile appeared on his face. These days, his mouth had been so tasteless that even his taste buds had forgotten what flavor was. Just then, a sexy woman holding a wooden chest entered the room. She was a blonde woman with green eyes. She approached Lu Sheng and, with a kind smile, mentioned that the divine seal wanted to give him this chest. Lu Sheng, who was absorbed in eating, came out of his trance, turned towards her, and upon seeing the chest, his eyes widened in surprise and curiosity. The woman opened the chest. Inside were energy crystals that were shining intensely due to their high purity. She revealed that there were a total of 436 grams. Despite feeling somewhat surprised, Lu Sheng remained calm, closed his eyes, and wiped the food remnants from his mouth with the help of a napkin. With a tranquil expression, he realized that Harold had been very generous. In an instant, he finished all the food, stood up, turned his back to the woman, and while he was walking away, he asked the woman to let him know the day Harold was ready to leave. The woman closed her eyes, placed her hands over her abdomen, bowed her head before Lu Sheng as a sign of respect, and with a smile bid farewell to the great martial saint. Somewhere in the central military district of the Dragon Kingdom, there were large and luxurious skyscrapers, and one of them was the army's conference building. Inside were all the marshals of the Dragon Kingdom. The Eastern Marshal, who was holding a report, began to look at the others, and his eyes widened with happiness. With a joyful expression, he informed them that according to the latest reliable news, Lu Sheng had fully recovered and returned. Upon hearing this, the Southern Marshal's eyes also filled with happiness. He began to observe the Eastern Marshal and couldn't help but smile. One of the marshals present at the conference became curious and asked if they could now contact Lu Sheng. With a serious gaze, the Marshal of the East explained that they could not, for the moment. Only Lu Sheng had been communicating with them unilaterally, and by tracking the source of the signal, it could be determined that he was approximately near the ocean in the southern part of the Eagle Kingdom. The eyes of the Marshal of the Central District filled with tranquility. He left the report on the table, intertwined his hands, and with a smile decided not to speak further on the matter and move on to the next topic. He asked if they should continue sending representatives to the Great World Masters Tournament. The attention of the Marshal of the East fixed on him, and his eyes began to shine with rage. In previous years, the army sent elite warriors to participate in the great competition with the goal of fostering the birth of a powerful martial saint-level warrior. And although the army suffered losses, the warriors continued to participate enthusiastically. But now that Lu Sheng existed, who was destined to become the future martial saint of the army, it was no longer necessary to take part in this bloody competition. The Marshal of the West clenched his fist and, with a furious expression, made it clear that they had to participate since there was no reason not to do so. According to him, they had to give everything to win. The Marshal of the North exploded with fury and, with a gaze full of rage, reminded them that for them, the World Masters tournament was a field for testing and competition. But in the eyes of the Marshal Saint, it was actually a stage for dispute over energy crystal distribution. The Marshal of the South also clenched his fists, and his eyes widened with seriousness. With a furious gaze, he revealed that in the past, the army always fought for the interests of the three martial saints of the Dragon Kingdom. Now that their opportunity had arrived, how could they not fight for it? With a gaze full of determination, the Marshal of the Central District mentioned that the god of the army's future was about to return, bringing back the glory they had not seen in more than 200 years. He decided to prepare him a great celebratory gift. They decided to go out and celebrate the return of the god of war with a great victory. A few hours later, dusk fell, and in the middle of the city stood the Tower of Marshal Saint. Inside was Marshal Saint himself, with his arms behind his back as he contemplated views of the city. A ninja arrived at the tower, knelt before him, and reminded him that only 15 days remained until the Great World Tournament of Masters began, asking if he was ready to depart. The Marshal Saint began to gaze towards the ground and nodded his head. The ninja, who was holding some reports in his hands, stood up and with a serious voice mentioned that this was the most recent information about that person. This caught the attention of the Marshal Saint, who became curious and gave the order for the ninja to withdraw. The ninja handed over the information, and with a leap, he left the tower. He turned towards the tower, clenched his fists, and while falling to the ground, reported that the subordinate of the Marshal Saint was withdrawing. The Marshal Saint took one of the reports where a photo of Lu Shang clenching his fist appeared, and he began to observe our boy in silence. He was Tan Yong-yu. His gaze fixed on the reports, and his eyes began to shine. He started touching his beard and couldn't help but feel surprised to see that Lu Shang was really not dead. Knowing that he would soon return, our boy had been defeated, had been reborn, and was about to reach the level of Marshal Saint. He read carefully, and his eyes widened in surprise upon seeing that with a level 8 body, he had seriously injured Marshal Saint Chao Jaya. Now Lu Shang could be called an unparalleled genius in history. Tan Yong-yu couldn't help but think that he had underestimated him. His eyes began to shine with rage as he started to regret it. But then he closed his eyes and coldly threw the reports out the window, thinking that there was nothing left to regret. His body began to release a powerful martial energy, and his eyes filled with determination. According to him, Chao Jaya was nothing more than a useless old man. While he had reached the level of Grandmaster at 42 years old and by 80 had managed to become a martial saint, his manifestation had reached a size of 1,000 meters, surpassing Chao Jaya hundreds of times. In a life or death confrontation, he would behead him in less than 5 moves. He used his power and launched a powerful blast of blue energy into the sky. Then evil energy began to manifest at one single point. Tan Yong-yu crossed his arms behind his back and began observing it. His martial will was like a golden sword capable of destroying everything. No matter how talented or monstrous Lu Shang was, compared to him, he was nothing. His martial will transformed into a weapon, and Tan Yong-yu grabbed it with his hand. His eyes began to shine with confidence, and with a smile, he made it clear that he was going to be the first to leave this planet. His eyes filled with rage, and he used the celestial slash, forcefully swinging his weapon made of martial will. The attack was so powerful that it cut through the atmosphere and reached space. Somewhere else on the planet, there were some hot springs far from the city. While a man with purple hair was enjoying a bath, someone wearing boots approached him from behind. It was night, and the moon was high in the sky. She was a woman with purple hair dressed as a ninja wearing a mask. She approached him with a curious gaze, asked if Chao Jaya was going to the World Masters tournament. Upon hearing this, Chao Jaya's eyes widened in fury. He turned around and, with an enraged gaze, asked if she thought that in this state he could go to the World Masters tournament. The woman turned her back on him and, with a calm gaze, adjusted her hood and mentioned that she had only asked out of habit. For her, this was a shame because from now on, and for many years, he would not have the right to receive energy crystals. Chao Jaya could not help but clench his fists and get angry. He began to stare at her and gave her the order to make sure to exchange with the guides the medicine to heal his martial soul. Once he had it, he was going to pay her twice the price. The woman turned her back on him, closed her eyes, and asked him to calm down as it was a unique opportunity, and even if he forgot about it, she would never forget it. Chao Jaya lost his composure and struck the water forcefully. As long as Lin Zheng you could get him 2 bottles of soul-nourishing elixir, he would be able to recover at least 80% of his strength in 3 years. Then, he would restore the foundation of the Extreme Martial Arts Academy and gradually accumulate his power. He could not help but curse Lu Sheng. His eyes widened with fear and rage, as he knew that Lu Sheng was not dead and that sooner or later he would come looking for him. He had to think of a strategy. And if he had no other option, he would do whatever was necessary to obtain the protection of Lin Zhengyu and Tan Zhengyu sins. No matter how strong Lu Sheng was, he would not be able to kill him while under the protection of 2 level 9 martial saints. Then something caught Zhao Zhai's attention, and his mind filled with terror. Without hesitating for even a second, he plunged into the water, thinking there was no way Lu Sheng could kill him. The World Masters Tournament, held once every 10 years, was about to begin. There were powerful martial warriors from all nations. On the blue planet, all the powerful forces were in motion. Dominant factions from different regions were heading together toward the battlefield. Those few who stood at the pinnacle of humanity had also begun to mobilize. This was the greatest event in the martial world. It was daytime, and the sky was clear. It was a splendid day on the island of the Golden Ring. This event in the martial world was the gathering of gods among men. The martial saint Harold and his men, who wore elegant suits, set out. Harold, who was at the front of everyone, with a determined gaze, thought that victory this time was going to be theirs. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, please subscribe our channel and like and share the video. Welcome to our channel. It was daytime and right in front of the Golden Ring Island, something happened and the waves began to form a strange pattern in the ocean. Not long after, the water started to concentrate at a single point, creating a marine whirlpool. This strange event caused the fish and crabs that inhabited the area to come ashore, and many of them lost their lives. Just then, someone whose body was surrounded by golden martial energy elegantly emerged from the marine whirlpool. Upon feeling this, the attention of the martial saint Harold and his men turned toward the body, causing their jaws and eyes to widen in surprise and confusion. They were all in shock, not knowing what was happening. It was our boy, Liu Sheng. Using his power, he began to create small golden steps and slowly started walking toward the island. They were in shock upon seeing that he had emerged from the sea whirlpool. Harold and his men quickly knelt before Liu Sheng, joined their hands, closed their eyes, and with a respectful demeanor welcomed the martial saint. Harold's eyes were full of fear. While sweating profusely, he realized that Liu Sheng had become stronger. He remembered that Liu Sheng had said he was a level 8 warrior, but it was obvious that he did not have the power of a level 8. If he was a level 8 warrior, then Harold was determined to cut off his own head and join the martial saints of the Dark Star. Using the golden steps, Liu Sheng reached the Golden Ring Island and began to observe Harold in silence. The attention of martial saint Harold was fixed on him. He thought about the guides and was sure that our boy was at the same level as the guides, and even if he wasn't far from being so. Liu Sheng softly landed on the ground and, with a calm expression, asked if Harold and the others were ready. Harold lowered his head before him as a sign of respect. Liu Sheng's attention was fixed on them, and his eyes widened in surprise because this was very strange to him. He remembered that Harold's experts had died and many had been seriously injured during the attack by Dark Star and the Black Magic Society. He was confused because he did not know how so many experts had appeared again in such a short time. Thinking calmly, it did not take him long to realize that Harold had merged the experts from Dark Star and the Black Magic Society. Harold stood up, extended his hand, and with a pleasant expression mentioned that they were ready to leave at any moment. Liu Sheng looked away, and with a serene gaze said that there was no more time to lose. They boarded a private plane. Harold, who was sitting in the seat next to Liu Sheng, began to observe our boy in silence. Liu Sheng took out an energy crystal, and his attention was fixed on it. He could not help but sink into his thoughts since energy crystals held many secrets. Liu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise. He brought the energy crystal closer and explained that the energy crystals Harold had given him had been completely absorbed by his body, and now his immortal cells had risen to more than 278. For him, their effect was truly incredible, and it was no wonder that even the strongest of advanced civilizations harvested them as stellar-level resources. Our boy's body began to emit a powerful martial energy. Feeling this, Harold's eyes widened in fear and surprise, making him sweat. His gaze fixed on Liu Sheng's body. Realizing that sitting next to him was like being under the sun while sitting beside a barbecue furnace. Liu Sheng's energy started expanding throughout the plane. Harold closed his eyes and concentrated, realizing that it wasn't just heat but a burning sensation. Every time Liu Sheng breathed, it was as if his body expelled lava. While he was distracted, Liu Sheng clenched his fist, turned towards him, and with a confident gaze caught his attention and asked if he believed that with a single punch he would be able to defeat a martial saint. Upon hearing this, Harold snapped out of his thoughts, and his eyes widened in fear. He couldn't help but swallow hard and feel chills all over his body. He quickly clasped his hands together and bowed his head before our boy, and with a respectful demeanor, revealed that he had a portion of the energy crystals he had collected from Dark Star and the Black Magic Society, promising that he would hand them over to him immediately. With his eyes full of tears, Harold took out a bag full of energy crystals and handed it to Liu Sheng. Our boy's attention was fixed on the bag, and his eyes began to shine with confusion. He didn't know what was happening. If he said that this was not really his intention, Harold would not believe him. Liu Sheng took the bag of energy crystals, and his attention focused on it, making his eyes fill with joy and a smile spread across his face, adding to what he had before. Liu Sheng now had more than a kilogram of energy crystals, admitting that Harold had many resources and money. Liu Sheng tossed the bag into the air and couldn't help but smile. Harold rested his head on his hand and couldn't help but sigh. This moment reminded him of an old saying from the Dragon Kingdom: accompanying a king was like accompanying a wild tiger. Back then, he didn't understand it very well. But now he fully comprehended it. Liu Sheng turned towards him and began to show a grateful smile, but Harold started to see death itself in our boy's aura for him. Being next to someone who at any moment could decide his life or death was truly like being accompanied by death itself, something terrifying. Liu Sheng rested his hands on the arms of the seat, and his eyes began to shine with hatred, making the energy emerging from his body grow more intense. Because his power had increased too quickly, he still had not mastered many aspects of controlling it properly. To get used to this power, many battles and high-intensity combats were necessary. He began to imagine himself kissing Snowy, something he couldn't do now since he would end up burning her mouth. He began to imagine himself with his arms crossed, next to his charred parents. If he spent too much time with his family, they would end up charred. Liu Sheng's gaze expanded with determination. He placed his hand on his chest. He needed pressure. The last time the guides had taken account, there were 24 level 9 martial saints on the blue planet. Now that 3 had died and some were injured, adding Harold, only 20 remained. He began to imagine all the powerful martial saints of the planet staring at him intently. He didn't know if the 20 martial saints would be able to put pressure on him. If 2 couldn't pressure him, he planned to face 20 or even 30. Liu Sheng turned his head towards the airplane window and with a serious gaze began to observe the landscape. If fighting against all the martial saints was not enough, then there would be no other option but to fight against the so-called guides. The airplane was flying at high speed. And it was already midday. Half an hour later, they arrived at an island, and on top of the mountains, there was a castle. Once the airplane landed, Liu Sheng stepped out, and his attention was fixed on the castle. Harold, who was standing behind him, extended his hands and explained that this place was called the Island of the Thousand Sages, which had been named by the World Martial Arts Association. Liu Sheng's eyes widened with joy, and a confident smile appeared on his face. Seeing that the island was called the Island of the Thousand Sages, he could not deny that the martial saints of the Blue Planet had rather grand aspirations. Then, he asked Harold what was next. Harold closed his eyes and put his hand inside his suit, explaining that before the start of the tournament, there was a party mainly for martial arts masters to exchange ideas and resources. Additionally, they could take advantage of the occasion to submit to the World Martial Arts Association a list of items they wished to trade. Liu Sheng became curious and began listening to Harold in silence. The martial saint Harold took out a list and asked our boy to take a look at it. Liu Sheng took the list, and his eyes widened in surprise. On the list, there was information about life nutrient liquid number 3, which had a certain nourishing effect on the martial soul and could strengthen the manifestation of the Dharma. The price was 2 kilograms of energy crystals per unit. There was also tempered life liquid number 3, which had a certain refining effect on the martial body and could strengthen it. It had the same price as the nutrient liquid, 2 kilograms of energy crystals per unit. While holding the list with one hand, Liu Sheng turned to Harold and, with a curious expression, mentioned that all available items for exchange were designed for martial saints. The lowest price was at least 1 kilogram of energy crystals. He realized that things hadn't gone well for Harold as a level 9 martial saint since he hadn't been able to save even 1 kilogram in over 100 years. Upon hearing this, Harold's eyes began to shine with embarrassment. He panicked and, with a forced smile, explained that the reason was that he had already exchanged some things before. So now he didn't have much wealth on hand. However, several martial saints with whom he had a good relationship still owed him quite a few energy crystals, promising that once he collected them, he would hand them over to Liu Sheng. A smile spread across our boy's face since he couldn't believe that the old fox Harold had an ace up his sleeve. Something caught our boy's attention, making him curious. His gaze fixed on the list, where there was also an item called Level 10 Will Protection Talisman. It contained the will of a level 10 expert and could be activated at will. But its exchange price was 30 kilograms of energy crystals per unit. Liu Sheng remembered when that bastard Zhao Ji spat out a talisman while on the brink of death. He grabbed the list again, and his eyes widened in surprise, realizing that Zhao Ji had paid 30 kilograms for the talisman. He began to imagine martial saint Zhao Ji smiling and making various rare items float. After being the human god of the Dragon Kingdom for more than 100 years, his wealth was not something that a mere organization leader like Harold could match. And it was very likely that he had also kept the inheritance of many martial saints who had fallen in battle during the war between the Dragon and Lion Kingdoms. Liu Sheng's eyes widened with hatred. He knew that these things were surely only meant to deceive martial saints from remote villages. He started imagining the guides with items hanging from their fingers. He, better than anyone else, knew that guides took leftovers from their civilizations, things they no longer used, to give them to martial saints. And in this way, they managed to make them sell their souls for the items. First, the guides impoverished them by 90%, then they exchanged trash with them. And finally, they took 10% of the energy crystals, making it a perfect business. Liu Sheng began walking toward the castle and threw the list into the air. Knowing that only by leaving the blue star and setting foot in the vast universe could one understand how immense and magnificent it truly was. Only then would they be able to stand on equal footing with true martial artists. A few hours later, the party began, and somewhere in the castle was the dressing room. Inside was Liu Sheng, who was getting dressed in front of a mirror. He started adjusting his tie and couldn't help but smile, not knowing if the guests would be able to recognize him if he stood before everyone. Harold, who was behind, extended his hands and with a smile mentioned that Liu Sheng's disguise was perfect, and although his appearance had changed, he still dazzled like a deity, radiant and perfect. With a serious expression, Liu Sheng explained that even if Harold made his adulation sound like flattery, he would still have to hand over every last gram of energy crystals he owed. Harold placed his hand on his chest, closed his eyes, and with a smile promised to do so and decided to go ahead. The guests began to enjoy the party, some drinking alcohol and others conversing among themselves. Liu Sheng came out of the dressing room and started walking through the hall, his attention fixed on the others. Everyone here had at least a grandmaster level, not only standing out in power, but also in appearance, realizing that this was truly a gathering of the planet's elite. Nothing like the boring birthday celebration of the Chen family. Among those at the party were Dong Shenghe and Lin Wanwen talking to each other. As Liu Sheng passed nearby, his gaze fixed on them. Seeing his brother-in-law's spirit, he noticed that he had resumed his martial path. Dong Shenghe had shaved his hair. With a kind smile, he began to converse with Lin Wanwen. Seeing this, Liu Sheng couldn't help but smile. He didn't know if this was a symbol of starting from scratch. Liu Sheng started walking through the hall and began looking at all the guests. He wanted to see if there were any other old acquaintances. Just then, something caught Liu Sheng's attention, making him stop and turn to the side. At the party were also the marshals of the army, who were chatting among themselves with a smile. Liu Sheng began observing them and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused upon seeing that even the army of the Dragon Kingdom was here. Although they did not have their own martial saint, they had still come to fight for Tan Zhongyu and Lin Zhengyu's interests, and had even brought their most precious treasure, the old yet unbreakable sword. He was curious without knowing whether he should approach them. Just then, a portal opened in front of everyone. Seeing this, they couldn't help but feel joyful and excited. Everyone clenched their fists because Miss Flona, the flower of the alliance, had arrived. Liu Sheng's gaze fixed on the portal, and his eyes widened in surprise. A beautiful woman with long hair emerged from the portal and began walking through the hall, causing all the men to start cheering for her. Liu Sheng was mesmerized as he watched Flona. To him, a fairy tale princess would not be more dazzling than her, and her genetics were exceptionally perfect, far above ordinary. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part.
While the tentacles were devouring everything that moved at the bottom of the ocean, Liu Shang began to concentrate, forming bubbles in the water. He closed his eyes and decided. It was time to enter the dream space to train a bit while his body took care of feeding him. The 3 eyes on his abdomen were shining intensely, searching for food. In the dream space, everything was chaos, buildings were destroyed, and there was no trace of human life, making it a perfect place to train. Once Liu Shang arrived in the dream space, a zombie thought it had found food and tried to attack him by surprise. But our boy reacted. In time, he clenched his fist, turned around, and delivered a strong punch to the zombie's jaw. His mission was to harvest the remaining memories of this place's great warriors. Another zombie appeared. Liu Shang delivered a powerful punch, defeating it without much effort. He began to observe the zombie's corpse with a calm expression. In total, he had cleared 3 streets, defeating a total of 8 zombies with the same power as martial warriors. Among them were 5 level 7 and 3 level 8 zombies, with power similar to that of a grandmaster. In front of him was a pile of corpses from the zombie warriors he had defeated. His attention was fixed on them. Nowadays, with perfect martial arts, he had a total of 50 types of zombies with different martial wills, all fused with his willpower. As he observed the corpses, a question came to his mind. He didn't know if there would be a qualitative transformation when there were 100 types of zombies. He decided to stop thinking about the matter, intertwining his hands, closing his eyes, and sitting on the ground to meditate. Now it was just time to wait for his wounds to heal a bit more so that later he could eliminate the cells before leaving. But then he remembered something, opened his eyes, and with a serious gaze, decided to check the information in the system's database. He called Aing and asked her to access his personal information. The sexy Aing began to manifest herself, closed her eyes, and nodded her. Our boy started watching her in silence. Not long after, several red windows of the system appeared in front of him. Liu Shang's eyes filled with curiosity and he began reading the information. Now he was sure that the information in the system's database about his future was fabricated. But what was clear was that the other stored data were real. Liu Shang placed his hand under his chin, and with a curious gaze began carefully reading through the information displayed on the system. Window. Martial arts inheritance, medicinal recipes, resource points, they were very important aids. And the key to accessing deeper hidden information within the system was obtaining more permissions. Just then, the eyes of our boy widened with surprise. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. In front of him was a window with the photograph of Zhao Ji, and in another photo appeared Lu Shang next to the corpse of the martial saint from the extreme dojo. In Ninghai, after severely injuring the martial saint from the extreme dojo, Lu Shang had disappeared while being gravely injured after the fight. However, after 3 years he had returned to kill Zhao Ji, defeating martial saint Lin Zhengyu and overcoming martial saint Tan Zhong. Lu Shang knew that this information was false since Zhao Ji hadn't died, but he decided not to pay much attention to it as sooner or later he was going to die. The system began to display personal information about Lu Shang. After a battle, our boy's body was surrounded by golden energy. At the age of 25 he had reached level 9, becoming the youngest martial saint in the history of the martial path, known as a perfect being, showing his strength to everyone, and there was no worthy rival capable of facing him. Lu Shang appeared in front of hundreds of men dressed in black clothes. At the age of 30, he had founded the sacred martial sanctuary and spread martial arts throughout the world, making a massive contribution to the development of human martial civilization, and under his tutelage, 10 more martial saints emerged. Seeing this, his eyes filled with joy, causing a proud smile to spread across his face. Previously he remembered having read that he was known as the strongest being under heaven, now that he had reached a higher level, and did not know why he had lost that title. His mind filled with curiosity, and he decided to keep reading to find out. The system began to display the image of Lu Shang releasing a powerful and malevolent energy. At 100 years old, he had reached level 10, thus becoming the first level 10 expert in the history of the martial path, paving the way for level 10 for future generations, and receiving the honorary title of martial ancestor. In the following 2 years, the world lost track of Lu Shang, and people came to the conclusion that the martial saint might have left Blue Planet and traveled towards the stars of the universe. While little Ying was floating nearby, a smile spread across Lu Shang's face, and he couldn't help but feel happy. He didn't know what it meant to be a martial ancestor, questioning if it was a title similar to Confucius from his past life, someone far superior to any god that existed on earth, and could be considered a supreme name destined to endure for generations. Lu Shang's eyes filled with surprise and fear, causing him to start sweating. He panicked, realizing that something was not right. With an expression full of fear, he began to recall when that bastard Zhao Ji had taken the card out of his mouth. The card was a protection talisman from a level 10 warrior, which demonstrated that this world should have originally had the path of level 10. He didn't know how it was possible that he had been the one to open this path to him. This was very strange, but he thought the reason behind it was that the information in the systems, the database, wasn't complete, causing a significant deviation in future predictions. Lu Shang calmed down, turned towards Ying, and with a calm expression explained that at the top of this world's pyramid there were still many secrets he did not understand. Now that he was a martial ancestor, he thought his access level should no longer be low, so he asked her to please check his permissions. Ying began to observe Lu Shang in silence, until several seconds later, she accessed the system's database, revealing that he had a historical evolution as a 10-star character. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with excitement. He couldn't help but smile since before he only had a level 7 clearance, and now it had directly risen by 3 levels. He adjusted his jacket with his hand, and his attention focused on Ying. His eyes filled with joy because, according to his previous experiences, level 7 clearance opened the path to advance from 7 to 8. Now that he had reached level 10, the system should open the way for him to progress from level 10 to 11. He had completely cleared the path from level 9 to level 11, so he asked her to bring out all the cultivation techniques of level 11. Aang extended her hand toward the system window, and using her powers, she began to modify the system's information. Lu Shang started observing silently with a curious gaze, ready to see how to ascend to level 11. Not long after, the system began creating a window with books and several scrolls of parchment. Lu Shang waited until the system finished loading. The system window disappeared, leaving the books and scrolls of parchment on the ground. He picked up one of the books, opened it, and started reading attentively. The first 5 were more advanced chapters than he had learned before, the last 4 were new. His attention focused on a new technique called the Art of 5 Seasons Fists, which had been created by Wang Qi. It was said that in ancient times, between heaven and earth, besides spring, summer, autumn, and winter, there existed a 5th season. And when the 5th season arrived, 10 suns would appear in the sky. The light and heat were capable of burning mountains, rivers, and lands until they were dry and withered. All living beings perished under the scorching heat, turning the world into an oven. Lu Shang's eyes widened in surprise as he realized that the Art of 5 Seasons Fists traced back to ancient martial arts. To recreate the terrifying scene of 10 suns in the sky at once. For him, this martial art was grandiose and majestic. It turned out that Shi Xingning's supreme master level called 10 suns in the sky had been derived by imitating Wang Qi's fist style. Lu Shang closed the book, and his mind filled with curiosity. He picked up a scroll and decided it was time to read it. He opened the scroll, and his expression changed, his gaze filled with confusion, his mind filled with questions and despair since he could not understand anything written on it. The scroll began to emit a powerful blue aura. Our boy's head started to smoke, but even so he decided to continue reading, making him feel furious. He read about the founder of the Yang Yishua technique and did not knowing what this technique was about or what relation it had with martial arts. For him, reading this was like reading a dictionary. Now his head hurts. But as he continued reading, his eyes widened in surprise. Even though he didn't understand it very well, this technique only talked about how to construct the internal universe, the connection between the external and internal universe and its construction. Additionally, it mixed a large number of theories of possibilities. To him, this was nothing more than an academic article and could not be considered a technique. Furthermore, this technique had a surprisingly high level. It didn't take him long to realize that this was the process for ascending from level 11 to level 12. Lu Shang, somewhat angry and confused, closed the scroll and left it on the ground. He was barely at level L8 and for now understood nothing, so he decided to forget about it and leave difficult things for later. He picked up another book, opened it with a curious expression, and began reading attentively. He decided that it was better to take a look at the 5 seasons technique. He started imagining the entire universe. Honestly speaking, he knew that if he managed to learn how to use the internal universe, then he would obtain history's strongest supreme combat technique. No other martial art or martial skill could compare with it, since after all, no martial art could be fiercer than using an internal universe to strike someone. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with seriousness and his attention fixed on the book. He had already reached the legendary 5th realm, and with this level 11 fist technique, no one knew what kind of power he was going to unleash. He started to gaze at his hand, which was emitting martial flames. His eyes were full of determination as he thought that with the fist of the 5 seasons technique, he might even be able to challenge powerful warriors of level 10 or higher. He placed his hand over his chest and absorbed the power he had in his hand. His eyes began to shine with excitement, causing a smile to appear on his face. He clenched his fist and swore to kill the powerful level 10 warrior who had left him gravely injured the next time they met. Next to him was Aang, and her body was shining. He turned to her and started observing her and asked her to show all the content of the flame project. She started projecting a system window and explained that he did not have sufficient permissions to access the content. Lu Shang remained silently watching, not knowing what was happening. He placed his hand under his chin and his eyes filled with surprise. This did not seem strange to him, so he decided to elevate his permissions to level 11 before being able to unravel all the secrets of the dream space. He closed his eyes, started shaking his head, and using his hand, he closed the system window. His most important goal now was to reach the 9th level from the 8th. He decided to see how the path to level 9 was achieved. He used the technique called total concentration, making golden flames appear around his body. First, he had to complete the fusion of the body, energy, and spirit into a single entity. Then he had to connect with the sky and the earth using the force of the world to forge his own martial seal and build a martial projection. This was where the difference between the most powerful warriors really began to show. He began imagining the spirit of a powerful martial warrior with 4 arms, and compared to it, the user of the martial projection seemed like an ant. According to what was mentioned, the standard for a martial projection had different qualities. If the martial projection was less than 1,000 meters tall, it was low quality. From 1,000 to 500 meters tall, it was medium quality, and more than 5,000 meters tall, it was high quality. Lu Shang's eyes filled with seriousness, and he couldn't help but go into. Our boy began to recall the martial projection of the martial saint from the Supreme Dojo. His miserable martial projection didn't even reach 500 meters, being of the lowest quality, and calling him a village martial saint was even too generous. The reality was that this guy only relied on earthly devotion to sustain his divinity, being trash. Lu Shang placed his hand under his chin and sank into thought. The martial projections condensed with natural breathing techniques and crystal visualization were both of maximum quality. His eyes began to shine with joy as he had an endless number of techniques and martial arts at his disposal. If he could combine these superior quality projections and fuse them all into his perfect martial art, he didn't know what kind of projection would emerge. He started imagining the projection of the spirit of a powerful demon with a murderous gaze. Lu Shang closed the book and decided not to think too much about it since daydreaming would make him lose his way. And besides, fusing all this was incredibly difficult. He had no idea where to start. But it didn't matter because the first step was slowly merging his body, energy, and spirit. He began cracking his knuckles, and his eyes filled with excitement as a smile appeared on his face. In the end, if he managed to learn the 5 seasons fist technique with the strength of his ever-increasing immortal cells, even if he got stuck at the peak of level 8 for some time, he would still be able to kill martial saints as if they were mere chickens. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video. A while later, as the air bubbles were emerging toward the surface, Lu Sheng gradually began to open his eyes and exited the dream space. Our boy had been carefully studying and training in the various newly discovered skills within the dream space, and after a month, he had mastered their fundamentals. His eyes were full of exhaustion, and despite having slept for more than a month, he was neither hungry nor fatigued since his mutant body had constantly taken care of nourishing him. He clenched his fist tightly, causing golden energy to appear around his body. He closed his eyes and focused. His external wounds had already healed, and his damaged organs had also regenerated. During this time, he had finally completely eliminated the remnants of power from the powerful level 10 warrior who had attacked him. Now all that remained was to wait a little longer for the small injury and his spiritual force to heal as well. He rested his hand on his knee and, with a calm gaze, prepared to stand up. Almost everything was ready, so he decided it was time to leave this place. The eyes on his abdomen activated and began scanning the area. Lu Sheng's eyes were filled with seriousness as he gathered momentum and started ascending towards the surface at great speed, creating air bubbles. The problem of his mutated body would resolve itself as soon as he left the abyssal cave. Once he exited this place, the rules being suppressed by the power of the cave would disappear, and without the help of the essence of flesh and blood from exotic beasts, his body would return to normality, and all alien cells would die. Once our boy ascended a little, something happened. The tentacles on his back started moving abruptly. He didn't pay much attention to it, thinking it must be something normal. But just then, the 4 tentacles shot backward, coiled up and grabbed tightly onto the stones, causing Lu Sheng's body to stop abruptly, his mind filled with confusion, making him turn around. His eyes spread in surprise, leaving him in shock. His attention fixed on the tentacles, and he was somewhat furious. Now that our boy was not moving, a malevolent energy began to emerge from the depths of the cave, causing a red flash to appear. Lu Sheng started observing carefully, remembering that this cave was just like an S-level cave, but the difference being that in the depths of the ocean there was a consciousness from another world, which had noticed that Lu Sheng had been resting in this place for some time. Now he was high-quality food and a good candidate. The energy became more intense, as what hid within it wanted to confuse Lu Sheng into staying. But as expected, he wasn't foolish at all. Consumed by rage, he grabbed one of the tentacles tightly. Lu Sheng, using his power, he grabbed another tentacle and began staring intently at the flash. He clenched his teeth and with little effort snapped one of the tentacles. The tentacle split in two, and the eye on it filled with tears upon feeling pain. Lu Sheng's gaze fixed on it. He was furious because the tentacle kept clinging to the rocks. He mentioned that he couldn't be blamed for splitting it in half, since after all this was his body. He clenched his teeth due to panic and went on alert, being aware that he couldn't stay in this place any longer since the self-awareness of the cells was becoming increasingly stronger, and no one knew what problems were going to arise. Afterwards, Lu Sheng extended his hand toward the surface, and using all his strength, began swimming towards the surface. The first thing was to get out of the cave, then solve the problem of the cells, and finally rebuild his stellar immortal body. Only with this would he be able to become a great hero again. But then something happened, and Lu Sheng's eyes filled with surprise and panic. A powerful golden energy began emerging from the immortal cells concentrated on his forehead. Lu Sheng stopped swimming, turned around, and his eyes widened in fear, realizing that the consciousness hidden in the cave had reached him and was not going to let him leave this place so easily. Dozens of red eyes appeared and began staring at Lu Sheng. Consciously, he started releasing energy, and his attention fixed on the eyes. He remained silent, not knowing what to do. Several tentacles began approaching our boy at great speed. He started observing carefully and soon realized that it was using force upon seeing that it hadn't been able to deceive him. He was not going to stand idly by doing nothing. He began to concentrate, power in his hand, and with a furious gaze full of determination, revealed that they were not on the same path, and forcing something that was not going to work would not bring good results. Our boy concentrated the power of the cells and transformed his arm into a powerful and sharp blade. He adopted an offensive stance, ready to defend himself from the attack. Once the tentacles approached to capture him, Lu Sheng moved at the speed of light, and using his sharp blade, cut the tentacles into pieces. His eyes began to shine with determination, showing that he wanted to get out of this place alive. Now that Lu Sheng was out of danger, He moved like lightning and got away from the eyes. Upon noticing this, the consciousness, who was furious, manifested and began to roar. In an instant he left the cave, started saying goodbye to the consciousness, and with a smile mocked it by saying there was no need for it to accompany him. Instead of feeling furious, the eyes of the consciousness filled with joy, as if it had an ace up its sleeve or another hidden plan to capture Lu Sheng. He thought it was out of danger, but then a powerful energy appeared. Lu Sheng's eyes widened in fear, making him sweat. A voice began to sound in his head, asking what he found so funny. Lu Sheng prepared to flee from this place once and for all, but just before he could move, a powerful portal similar to that of the level 10 warrior who had left him almost dead emerged. Behind him, Lu Sheng was paralyzed with fear, and his eyes widened in confusion, not knowing what to do to get out of this place. His body began to be sucked into the portal, and it didn't took him long to realize that this was the abyss. The persuasion plan had only been a facade of consciousness, and its true purpose was to deceive him into entering the abyss. He tried to move but was unable. The portal connected to a different space where there were several planets. Lu Sheng appeared in this place and began floating, and it didn't take long for him to realize that the place was dangerous. His body had changed and now seemed to be made of energy instead of matter. The portal started closing, our boy's attention focused on it, and instead of panicking, remained calm. It didn't surprise him that people who entered the abyss never returned, since the only way back closed off. And although it seemed like there wasn't any danger in this place, those trapped here were lost forever in countless spaces. Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with tranquility. After thinking calmly, he realized that something was not right. The portal had not disappeared but was in another place, only he had not found it yet. Otherwise, level 10 and 11 warriors would not be able to come and go from Earth. The only issue now is that he did not know how to find the portal to return. Just then, one of the tentacles gazed fixed on him, and it began pointing to one side. The tentacle started touching our boy's chest, catching his attention. Lu Sheng's eyes filled with surprise as he realized that it knew where the portal to return was. His mind became filled with confusion since he did not know how he could know where the portal was. Wondering if the key to entering and leaving this place lay in alien cells, he decided to stop thinking about it and go take a look. His eyes began to shine with determination, asking it to indicate where the portal was. The tentacle started pointing in which direction to go, and our boy began following the instructions, heading towards the portal. He started observing the planets and couldn't help but smile with a joyful expression. He realized that this space was truly peculiar, it was indescribable. He felt as if he were in a space of nothingness. Our boy began following the instructions of the demonic cells, and then the tentacles started moving with excitement. Lu Sheng began observing and couldn't help but smile upon realizing that the intense emotion of joy from the cells was very strong, which meant they were close to the portal. His happiness did not last long as a powerful ball of evil energy began to manifest above him. Lu Sheng froze in place, not knowing what was happening. His gaze filled with fear, making him panic as something was wrong and the consciousness had come to catch him. The eye that was on the tentacle filled with malice. Lu Sheng became furious and started shouting, calling the tentacle bastard. This place had an exit, and it was the exit where the consciousness that wanted to catch and devour him was. The malignant energy began to grow more intense, and not long after, a giant eye and several small eyes appeared and started staring fixedly at our boy. The consciousness was happy to have found Lu Sheng. Lu Sheng began to observe the eye in silence, paralyzed with fear, not knowing what kind of warrior this monster was. The eye used its power, making a hand made of spiritual energy. It appeared it prepared to catch Lu Sheng. He raised his head and saw how little by little the hand was getting closer. The hand tried to catch him, but at that moment, Lu Sheng moved at great speed, barely saving himself, his gaze fixed on the eyes. He couldn't help but grit his teeth and feel desperate. The tentacles emerging from his body stood in front of him and prepared to attack him. And upon seeing this, he couldn't help but panic even more. Voice of the penguins. Lu Sheng turned around and his eyes filled with confusion. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Not far from Lu Sheng, there was a snowy mountain and the sky was clear. With a calm expression, our boy began to scan his surroundings and sighed upon seeing ice. He became curious as he did not know exactly where he was. Several penguins surrounded him. The tentacles that Lu Sheng had previously cut off grew back on his body. He placed one hand on his waist, and his attention fixed on them, realizing that he was in Antarctica. The eyes on his abdomen started staring at him intently and growling to get his attention, and it worked very well. Lu Sheng was furious, and without hesitating even for a second, clenched his fist tightly and punched one of the eyes. His eyes filled with seriousness, he began to stare at them intently and made one thing clear now that they were inside his body. They had to obey him, or otherwise, they would die. Lu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise. He realized that his alien body had its own consciousness, but this didn't matter since they had dared to betray him, and if he couldn't even fully control his own body, there was no point in practicing martial arts. The eyes reactivated, they started observing Lu Sheng and growled again. While the tentacles floated, our boy clenched his fist and fixed his attention on them. With a serious expression, he explained that if they didn't want to die, then they must follow his rules. First was to follow his orders, second was to condense energy, then transform, and finally sublimate. Lu Sheng closed his eyes and sank into his thoughts. He decided it was time to establish some clear rules for the cells. Inside his body, there were a bunch of alien blue cells. He concentrated and a golden energy began to approach the cells. He had never tried this before, but he wanted to know what would happen when the cells took the same path as the immortal cells. Lu Sheng closed his eyes and began to concentrate, making a powerful golden energy appear in his chest. He wanted to know what kind of existence was going to be born when these cells followed the path of the immortal cells, questioning if they were going to be able to resist the annihilation of the rules. The energy little by little began to enter the cell nucleus one after another, due to the constant impact of refinement. The alien cells little by little began to sublimate and experience active apoptosis. Lu Sheng decided to concentrate all the energy in a single point. He fixed his spiritual force on that point and infused all his energy with all his strength, causing the cell nucleus to start shining intensely. The cells began to undergo changes, first about 10,000 times until reaching 1,000,000 times. A smoke screen appeared around Lu Sheng, and once it disappeared, it could be seen that his body had returned to normal, and there no longer seemed to be traces of the alien cells. Lu Sheng's eyes were filled with sadness, and his attention was fixed on his hand. It was a pity because just after billions of transformations, he was about to enter a new level. But the energy of the alien cells had been exhausted and he had no choice but to temporarily stop the process to enter hibernation. Not every trace of his previous body had disappeared. In his hand there was still a blue eye, which was slowly beginning to close. Once the eyes closed, Lu Sheng began observing carefully and realized that this path was viable, so he decided to try transforming the cells later. Just then, the sound of a ship's horn was heard. Lu Sheng's eyes spread in surprise. He turned around and couldn't help but feel somewhat astonished. In the middle of Antarctica, there was a large ship sailing the sea. It was gigantic and seemed very luxurious. The attention of our boy fixed on the ship. He hid behind the iceberg and began to observe without knowing what a ship was doing in this area. He jumped and started to fly. He wanted to take advantage of this moment to confirm the place where he was now. The ship was sailing at full speed, breaking the ice in its path. Lu Shang started flying, got a little closer, and his gaze filled with confusion since on the ship there were 30 warriors below level 7, 2 level 7 masters. Additionally, there was a scientific room, so there could be a level 8 Grand Master supervising. By their appearance, they all seemed to be people from the Lion Kingdom. For him, this was something suspicious and strange. What caught his attention the most was the level 8 Grand Master. The ship was very luxurious. It had several floors, and on the highest one there were a lot of people. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine. Using his powers, he started scanning the area to see where the level 8 Grand Master was. Several minutes later, he found the room where the Grand Master was. Somewhere on the ship, there was a couple sitting on the sofa, having a good time. The level 8 Grand Master was a man with orange hair. Above him was a sexy woman. The man started observing her and couldn't help but smile. Lu Shang realized that this guy was nothing more than a womanizer and lover of drinking. Next to them was a table on which there was a ring with a purple eye. Lu Shang paid attention and realized that judging by the pattern of the ring, it was an ocular ring. Our boy was perplexed and confused. This ship belonged to the research organization Ocular known as Huion. His mind filled with curiosity, so he decided to take a look at the other rooms in search of information. In some other room of the ship, there was a woman with blue hair sitting and writing something. She seemed to have the best room since sunlight was coming directly through the window. She picked up the pen and with a cheerful expression began to write in her diary. Today was February 14th of the year 317 and it was sunny weather. It was her 25th Valentine's Day. She wasn't enjoying red wine or steak at an elegant restaurant. No music fitting for the occasion nor an attractive companion for a date. She was going to spend this day alone in the cabin of the explorer amid the extreme cold of Antarctica, surrounded by penguins and exotic creatures. She began to imagine a man wearing a scientist's lab coat with his arms behind his back. This was the 28th day since she had joined Professor Nepson's research team, one of the greatest masters in genetics of this century and on the entire planet. His vast knowledge, brilliant ideas, and passionate attitude toward academic pursuit were everything worth learning for her. A smile spread across her face as she continued writing in her diary. Her eyes were full of admiration because being able to follow Professor Nepson was the luckiest thing that had happened to her in life. She thanked her university mentor, Mrs. Selina, because if it weren't for her enthusiastic recommendation, she wouldn't be here. With a cheerful expression, she continued jotting everything down in her diary. Lu Sheng transformed into a spirit, appeared behind her, placed his hand under his chin, and with a curious gaze began to read attentively. After reading her long diary, he more or less understood the background of this ship. This ship was a team tasked with collecting and researching genes from exotic beasts around the Indian Ocean. This also explained why there were strong warriors on board. Hunting exotic beasts to obtain genetic samples required powerful fighters. The expression of our boy changed, and his eyes widened in surprise as something caught his attention. The girl did not notice Lu Sheng's presence and continued writing distractively in her diary. The leader of this team seemed to be the Professor Nepson mentioned in the diary, so he estimated that guy must have quite a high status within the organization, like a golden figure. He began to imagine an eye surrounded by beasts. It was worth noting that Professor Nepson seemed to have a different perspective from the mainstream on the origin of mutated beasts and martial arts. He considered that both originated in the mythological concepts of demons and gods, and he had always tried to prove it, often hearing that science ends in mythology. The girl placed the pen on the table, closed her eyes, and with a smile stretched her arms. This was all she had to write in the journal for today. Just before she could move, Lu Sheng moved like lightning and appeared in front of her. With a piercing gaze, he demanded to know who Professor Nelson was. The woman's eyes filled with fear and confusion. She couldn't help but panic, asking who he was. Upon seeing that this method was not going to work, Lu Sheng activated mental control and began to imbue waves into her mind. The ability took effect, and in a matter of seconds, the girl calmed down, and with a serene gaze, she began to observe our boy. She took out a photograph of Professor Nepson. He was an old man who wore glasses. Lu Sheng started observing the photo carefully, thanked her, and then disappeared. The girl remained paralyzed, holding the photo for several seconds. Once the mental controls stopped taking effect, she returned to normal and with a confused gaze questioned whether she had fallen asleep. Her attention was fixed on the photo of Professor Nepson. She began to imagine the professor winking at her. She couldn't help but blush like a tomato and be in shock. She didn't know why she was staring intently at the photo of Professor Nepson. Today was Valentine's Day, and she thought that maybe she'd made some fantasy about him. Somewhere on the ship, there was a research laboratory. Inside was Professor Nepson. He had his head resting on his arms and was sleeping like a log. There were several folders on the table. He was dreaming, thinking that Berlin's mythologies were very different from those of other countries, believing that perhaps they could bring new ideas. Lu Sheng entered the laboratory and began to gaze silently at Professor Nepson. Without making any noise, he picked up one of the folders. His eyes widened in surprise. It was a compilation of data on ancient myths from Dragonland, ancient myths from Lionland, and mythological origins from Eagle Land. He was confused to see that they had moved so many resources just for these legends of dubious authenticity. Professor Nepson kept sleeping like a log. Lu Sheng couldn't help but smile, realizing that this organization was very rich. He thought that maybe he could take advantage of this to get some benefit from them. Lu Sheng transformed into energy and disappeared without a trace. He left the ship and returned outside. While the energy was entering his body, his attention focused on the beautiful landscape. His eyes filled with surprise as something caught his attention. He activated his power, making golden energy appear around him. He started flying through the sky at great speed. He decided to lend himself for a purpose. Not far from the area, there was another ship. On the deck were two men, one of whom had both hands resting on the railing and mentioned that it would be a week before they returned. The old man who was looking through binoculars replied that it would be less time. He had noticed that some of the team leaders no longer wanted to stay. He put down the binoculars, and with a sincere expression explained that following a scientific research team is just an ordinary worker was exhausting. But everything depended on what Professor Nepson said. Although he seemed weak and fragile, his position in the organization was no less than that of those with higher royal emblems. Even those with common royal emblems did not dare contradict him. The other man turned towards him and couldn't help but feel somewhat surprised. The old man's watch began to ring. With a curious gaze, he started looking at the watch without knowing what was happening. Someone revealed to the captain that suddenly a powerful underwater current had emerged beneath them, diverting the ship, asking them to look ahead. In front of them was an iceberg. The captain was in shock, giving the order to turn the helm as soon as possible. The other man put his hands on his head and couldn't help but panic. Just a moment ago, the iceberg wasn't in the area and had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. They couldn't control the ship in time and turned the helm, causing it to crash forcefully against the iceberg. The ship stopped in place, and inside the iceberg was someone. It was none other than Lu Sheng. He began to gaze at the ground and a smile spread across his face. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video. The scene shifted to the space where Lu Sheng's body had been sucked in by the portal. The planets were beautiful, and everything seemed calm until two energies began clashing with each other. One was golden and the other purple and evil, each clash more powerful than the last, even capable of making the planets tremble. Within the energy were two powerful warriors, one in human form and another in beast form. Both moved swiftly and collided their fists against each other, creating a powerful flash capable of blinding anyone. The body of the human warrior was surrounded by golden martial fire. He was furious, clenching his fist tightly. He began concentrating his power into his fist and with an expression full of rage commanded the evil force to die. The demon's eyes were shining with malice and his body seemed to be made of energy that was not from this world. He simply stepped back and began to show a confident smile, ready to receive the attack. The human warrior activated his power, making a circle appear behind his back. He gathered all his power in his hands, then brought them together to fire a powerful burst of energy toward the demon. The demon who had been smiling before had no time to react, and the burst of energy hit him squarely on the body. The attack was so powerful that his body began to burn, causing him to open his mouth and start screaming in agony. The burst of energy pushed what was left of the demon's body, and not long after, it reached one of the planets and struck the ground with force, shattering the area into pieces. He began to laugh, revealing that he was immortal and would never be destroyed. He could be reborn infinitely on this earth until the destruction of this world, vowing that he would return. In this world, it was nighttime and the sky was beautiful. Back at the battle scene, the ground was filled with remnants of the demon. He had not died yet, and his eyes were still active. He started staring intently at the human warrior and couldn't help but feel furious. The powerful human warrior whose body was surrounded by golden martial energy descended onto the planet, and his attention focused on the remains of the demon as moonlight illuminated the area. He couldn't help but feel relieved to see that finally, the seal had succeeded. But then, something unexpected happened, and something began to approach the human warrior at great speed from behind. Upon feeling this, his eyes started to shine with seriousness, and he turned his head back to see what was happening. One of the martial flames that was on his body slowly began to fade away, and then the human warrior, who was Lu Shang, lost consciousness and his eyes closed. His body began to fall toward the ground, and little by little the golden energy that was on his body started peeling off in pieces like the shell of a boiled egg. Our boy's body shot toward the ground and struck hard against the ice, creating a large curtain of smoke. Once the smoke screen disappeared, Lu Shang could be seen inside the ice with his eyes closed. It seemed that he was still alive and had only lost back on Earth. Professor Nepson, who was sleeping like a log with his head resting on top of the table, suddenly woke up, throwing all the sheets from the folders into the air. His eyes were full of surprise and his mind filled with confusion. He began to sweat like crazy, put his hand on top of his head, and his eyes widened with curiosity. He let out a sigh without knowing if what he had just seen had been a dream. For him, the dream had been wonderful, as if it were a myth. The young man he had seen was strong and dazzling like the sun. He felt intrigued to know who he was. He opened his diary, grabbed a pen, and decided to write down the dream immediately so he would never forget it. He believed it was a divine revelation that God had secretly given to him. Just as he was about to write the dream in his diary, something happened. The ship tilted to one side, moving his table and causing all the books to fall to the floor. His eyes widened in confusion. Not knowing what was once the ship stabilized, he started looking around and quickly realized that due to a great impact, the ship had stopped. His mind filled with curiosity, he got up from the chair and opened the door. Several crew members of the ship were running like madmen. With a surprised gaze, Nepson asked what was happening. One of the men, with a serious expression, revealed that the ship had collided with an iceberg. Professor Nepson adjusted his glasses. He was in shock and could not believe that such an advanced ship had collided with an iceberg. The ship's crew went out to the deck. In front of them was a large iceberg. Two men began to release the anchor. Professor Nepson also went out to the deck, approached the captain, and with a gaze full of fear asked what had happened and how they had collided with an iceberg, questioning every nook and how they were going to continue the journey. The captain remained calm, extended his hand toward his men, and with a tranquil gaze revealed that the ship had been dragged by an underwater current, which caused it to veer off course. But luckily, with the help of his team, the ship had only grazed the iceberg slightly. His eyes were shining with sincerity. With a smile, he asked the professor not to worry since the damage was not serious and they could continue sailing. Many questions came to the professor's mind. He began to observe the captain, asking why they had stopped the ship now. With a serious expression, the captain turned toward the iceberg, revealing that this iceberg was a bit strange since when they had grazed it a moment ago. He had seen something. Professor Nepson's eyes widened in surprise, awakening his curiosity. He knew that the captain hadn't stopped the ship for having seen just an ordinary penguin. There must be something strange. The captain asked Professor Nepson to look at it himself with his own eyes. Nepson turned toward the iceberg, and with a curious gaze, he began adjusting his glasses. In front of them was a large iceberg, and inside it seemed to be a human body. Nepson's eyes widened in surprise upon seeing this. He couldn't help but be in shock when realizing there was a person. He placed his hands on the ship's railing to see the iceberg more closely. He was speechless and swore that there was a person inside the iceberg. The eyes of the captain of the ship, who was behind, filled with fear and surprise, leaving him in shock. He could not move due to fear. The professor began to imagine the powerful human warrior Lu Xing that he had seen in his dreams. His jaw dropped when he realized that the person inside the iceberg was the human warrior. He was identical to the one from his dreams, realizing that gods truly existed in this world. He turned towards the crew members of the ship, began pointing at the iceberg with his finger, and with a serene expression gave them the order to cut out the block of ice and take it to his laboratory immediately. The men were in shock, not knowing if this guy had lost his composure. In some room on the ship, someone was holding a glass of red wine. Due to the impact of the ship against the iceberg, the wine moved slightly inside the glass. The waiter, a man with purple hair, placed his hand over his chest and bowed his head in front of the man as a sign of respect, explaining that it had only been a small accident when brushing against the iceberg with the hull of the ship, which was nothing serious. But he revealed that inside the iceberg they had found the body of a Western man, adding that the body seemed very realistic. The man with black hair closed his eyes and prepared to take a sip of with a calm expression. He mentioned that it was just a body of some Western barbarian, asking what was so special about it. The waiter raised his head and casually put his arm behind his back, mentioning that the body had nothing special about it. He had examined it and discovered that it was a very normal body, probably of a martial artist who had come to the Arctic Circle seeking to push their limits with some extreme training method but had ultimately frozen to death inside the iceberg. The man's eyes filled with boredom and he looked away. The waiter seemed somewhat tired and had dark circles under his eyes with a suspicious expression. He mentioned that although it was strange, Professor Nepson seemed incredibly interested in the corpse, insisting that it was the body of an ancient god, talking about revelations and things like that. He had gone so far as to end the exploration immediately and return tonight. The man began pouring more wine into his glass and replied that Nepson had always been a bit odd, saying exotic beasts and warriors were products of myths. He decided to let him do whatever he wanted. He crossed his legs, grabbed the glass of wine, closed his eyes and started laughing, as researchers like him always had some oddity. And besides, coming back early wasn't so bad since life on this ship was unbearably boring. The waiter put his hand over his mouth, closed his eyes and also started laughing. The ship's crew cut out the piece of ice where our boy's body was frozen, then stored it inside a container and took it to Nepson's laboratory, which was located on the lowest level of the ship. Nepson arrived at his laboratory and upon seeing Lu Xing's body, he couldn't help but go into shock because he was completely identical to the warrior he had seen in his dreams. Our boy had his eyes closed to pretend. Nepson approached the container and began to observe carefully. His eyes widened with happiness as every detail was identical. There wasn't a single mistake. He couldn't help but smile thinking that this was the god of his dreams. He put his hand inside the pocket of his lab coat, took out his journal, and decided to record the scenes from his dream, but then thought it would be better to draw them. Nepson pulled out a pen with an excited smile and started drawing and jotting down everything he had dreamed. According to him, this was the true origin of exotic beasts and the path of the martial artist. He was sure that once he published this, he would become the greatest scientist of this century. While Nepson was distracted thinking about the awards he would receive for making this discovery, little by little, Lu Sheng began to open his eyes and a powerful purple energy started to emerge from one of his eyes. He used his ability called dimensional space, and thanks to it, he could see the interior of the entire ship as if it were a model. While Nepson was distracted writing in his journal, Lu Sheng began to scan the entire laboratory. His eyes widened in surprise because he discovered something fascinating. Somewhere in there was a cabinet full of containers with blue liquid. Inside, there were at least 100 bottles of exotic marrow liquid ranging from level 3 to 8, representing a fortune. Lu Sheng's gaze fixed on Professor Nepson. Just as our boy had imagined, those working in scientific research always had abundant resources and funds at their disposal. Nepson had always been obsessed with the connection between myths and exotic beasts along with the path of the martial artist. He had always tried to prove it. He was someone superstitious and stubborn. At this moment, with just a bit of hypnosis and induction, he had managed to make this guy easily fall into the lies he had woven. When Lu Sheng had controlled Lai Dai's mind, her eyes had started to shine. Although Nepson held a high position in the research circle, at the end of the day, he was nothing more than an ordinary person with elevated status. Our boy never imagined that the improvised method he had used to deal with Lai Dai in the past would be so useful here. Nepson's eyes were full of joy. With an excited smile, he continued writing everything down in his journal. What followed now was simply to constantly reinforce suggestions between dream and reality. Deep into hypnosis and brainwashing, and thus Nepson would become the most fervent believer of this ancient god. Suddenly, Nepson stopped writing in his journal. With a worried gaze, he realized that this was something only he had dreamed about. He could confirm the existence of the god but did not know how to make others believe him. He dropped his journal and pen on the floor and put his hands over his head. He couldn't help but panic. Only he had received the revelations, he didn't know how to prove it, just the corpse wasn't going to be enough. He couldn't simply open up his own head and show the revelation to others. An idea came to his mind. He removed his hands from his head and with a surprised gaze, decided that the god himself would tell them. But letting the god tell everyone what had happened was somewhat of a complicated task. But for Nepson, a highly renowned scientist, it wasn't a problem. He could revive the god, and once the god descended again onto this earth, all doubts and falsehoods would be destroyed. Silence reigned for several minutes until Nepson's eyes expanded and a light of hope began to shine. He sank into his thoughts for several minutes until he struck his fist against his palm. He couldn't help but smile since there was nothing more convincing than he began to dance with joy around the vessel where Lu Sheng's body was, thinking he was a genius. He was determined to revive this god. His eyes began to shine with joy. He clenched his fist and with a confident smile, swore to make this world great again. In his mind, he was a genius. The god Lu Sheng started gazing at the ground and couldn't help but smile because everything was going according to plan. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video. It was a splendid day and the sun was shining high in the sky, and somewhere in the eastern military district. There was a large, luxurious building, standing out among the rest for its beauty. Inside the building, there was a training room, in which stood a white-haired woman. She was surrounded by giant but shiny steel balls. She was none other than Snowy. She remained silent for several seconds, and then, little by little, she began to raise her head and her attention focused on the balls. Her eyes were full of determination. She extended her hands, began to stare intently at the balls, and used her power, causing her body to emit a powerful and intense red energy. She gave the order for the metal balls to rise. In a matter of seconds, a golden energy appeared around the metal balls. She concentrated her power, making the metal balls slowly begin to float in the air as if they were balloons. She started observing the metal balls, placed her hands in front of her face, and with a serious expression decided to test her new technique. In the blink of an eye, the balls began exploding one after another, creating small explosions. She turned her back on them and started to walk away, Then she closed her eyes and, since she was somewhat exhausted from having used so much energy, she wiped her chin with her hand. I'm not going to lie, but she has a good cake. Anyway, while she was walking away, the phone in the back pocket of her pants started ringing. Her mind filled with curiosity, she took the phone out of her pocket and turned it on to check if a new message had arrived. It was a message from our boy. He revealed to Snowy that he was fine but asked her not to reply to the message or think too much about it either. Upon seeing that this message was from Lu Sheng, she put her hand over her mouth, and her eyes filled with tears and joy. She couldn't believe that Lu Sheng was okay and hadn't died. She remained paralyzed looking at the message, and a while later, Qin appeared and entered the training room. With a cheerful gaze, he began to smile and wave at her, asking if she had received the message. Snowy placed the phone on her chest, and her eyes filled with tears. Even though she was very happy to know that our boy was okay, she couldn't help but cry. Qin approached her, and upon seeing this, his eyes filled with surprise and confusion. She realized that she had also received a message from Lu Sheng, reminding her that he had said our boy would have no problems and would return safe and sound. She pressed the phone against her chest, closed her eyes, and couldn't help but smile and feel relieved. Saying that she wasn't worried would be a license after all, he had disappeared off the face of the earth for a long time. Now that there was finally news about him and the heavy stone in her heart had finally fallen, she couldn't help but wonder when Lu Sheng was going to return. Her phone rang again, she turned it on and opened Qin's chat message, Lu Sheng's sister. She wrote to Snowy revealing that she had news about her brother, then sent a stuffed animal emoji. Snowy, who was very happy, replied that she had also received messages from Lu Sheng and then sent a happy cat emoji. In the Ninghai Sea, there was a high-ranking military ship sailing at full speed. On board was the Eastern Marshal, who had his hand resting on the railing and was observing the beautiful sea. While he was distracted, lost in thought, a soldier appeared behind him, gave a military salute, and caught his attention. Upon hearing his voice, the Eastern Marshal came out of his trance and with a calm expression began to observe the soldier, who revealed that there was an urgent report from headquarters. General Lu Sheng had sent news saying that he was fine but would need a few more days to return. Upon hearing this, his eyes spread with joy and happiness. He turned towards the soldier and couldn't help but smile. Now that there was news of Lu Sheng, he decided it was time for everyone to retreat and gave the order to the soldier to inform everyone to return to the military district. He put his hand behind his back, clenched his fist, began gazing at the sky, and a smile appeared on his face. The army had been waiting for this day for more than 200 years, and of course they didn't mind waiting a little longer. Besides, it wouldn't be long before the god of the future army finally returned. From that day on, half a month passed, and after an arduous journey, the research ship finally successfully returned from Antarctica to Lion Country. The ship was so luxurious that it even had a helipad. Not far from the area, there was a beautiful island, full of trees and mountains, called Golden Ring Island. Located on the border between the countries Lion and Eagle, it was an island without satellite location. A few hours later, the ship arrived at the port, and using some stairs, the workers started to unload Professor Nepson's luggage and belongings. Among the passengers were two men. The man wearing a cap and holding onto his backpack strap with one hand extended his hand toward his friend and with a smile mentioned that after sailing for several months, the expedition had finally ended. The other man put his hands behind his head, closed his eyes, and casually replied that the expedition had been boring. He was honest and mentioned that this type of escort mission was worse than going to fight with the Dark Star and the Black Demon Society. The man turned his head to one side, and his eyes widened with admiration. With a smile, he asked if he also thought the same way as they did. The man wearing a cap turned towards them and began observing in silence. The purple-haired man who was smoking a cigarette started descending the stairs, explaining that anguish was also part of training. The two men turned around, began watching him, and their minds filled with confusion. They explained that the level of master was high and distant, and they were still very far from reaching it. The man opened his eyes and his gaze filled with curiosity as something caught his attention. In front of them was the capsule where Lu Shang's frozen body was. Professor Nepson was in front, giving orders, asking the workers to hurry up and make sure not to damage it. Several men were helping to take the capsule off the ship. The man approached and began observing Lu Shang in silence. The attention of the three focused on Nepson, with a gaze full of disdain. The man wearing a cap said that Nepson was a fool since he treated a simple corpse like a treasure. With an angry expression, his friend mentioned that he had heard Nepson wanted to revive the corpse. For him, this was ridiculous since there was no way to bring the dead back to life. The man with purple hair, who was smoking a cigarette, simply began to think in silence. His gaze fixed on Lu Shang and his eyes widened with curiosity. He was honest in saying that his mind was full of questions. He started walking towards the capsule and with a calm expression gave the workers the order to wait a moment. One of them turned around and greeted the man respectfully, calling him Lord of the 10th Seal. Nepson went on alert, stood in front of the capsule, extended his hands and with a furious expression asked Elton what he was doing, mentioning that this corpse was his precious experimentation material. Elton kept walking towards him and then, with a serene look, used his power and asked Nepson to step aside. Causing Nepson's body to start floating, the mind of the poor professor filled with fear. The professor's body shot backward and crashed into two workers, their eyes widened with concern as they asked if he was okay. Nepson stood up and was furious. According to him, Elton was a barbarian, thief, and vandal. Elton approached the capsule and his attention fixed on Lu Shang, explaining that he was just going to take a look. Our boy made no movement so as not to raise suspicion. Elton extended his hand toward Lu Shang and, due to his great curiosity, used his power, causing his hand to start emitting a green glow. He decided it was time to investigate this corpse a little. Lu Shang, who had his eyes closed, felt Elton's energy and couldn't help but go on alert since if this guy touched his body, the whole plan would be ruined. The green energy appeared in Elton's hand and little by little he began to bring it closer to the capsule where our boy's body was. At first, Lu Shang did nothing, thinking about what to do now, but then he clenched his fist and began to release orange energy. If he didn't attack immediately, something bad could happen. Just before Elton could touch Lu Shang, by chance, his phone started ringing. Elton stopped abruptly and his eyes widened in surprise. He took out his mobile phone, turned his back on Lu Shang, and began to walk away. He decided to forget about this matter since he had no time to waste arguing over a corpse. He had other more important matters to attend to. Our boy little by little began to open his eyes and his gaze fixed on Elton. He had barely been saved. If that level 8 master had come to inspect directly, Lu Shang was not sure if he would have been able to keep pretending, much less because there were several details that would not withstand a thorough examination. Nepson was hypnotized and brainwashed. That could be ignored, but not everyone was foolish. Nepson, who was somewhat happy, began approaching our boy and used his hand to call all the workers so they could continue moving the capsule. Lu Shang closed his eyes again. He felt relieved that Elton had left, as otherwise he would have had no choice but to kill everyone and forcibly escape, but luckily, at the last moment, that guy had been called away by some important matter. Nepson's eyes were shining with hatred. He decided to make sure to report Nepson to the Master of Divine Seals. He gave the order to his men to move quickly and transport the corpse to the laboratory. A few minutes later, they took Lu Shang's body to the laboratory and connected it to a special machine. Nepson, who had his arms behind his back, stood silently contemplating but then something happened, and Nepson's expression changed. His eyes widened in surprise. He was in shock and couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Little by little, the level of liquid inside the capsule began to decrease. Nepson was speechless as the mutant metallurgy liquid had been absorbed by Lu Shang's body. He was happy to see that his plan was working, believing that divine will was awakening little by little. If enough energy was provided, soon the god would fully resurrect. He approached the microphone and with an excited smile gave his men the order to immediately exchange all his research resource quotas for this month for high-level metallurgy liquid and send it to the laboratory. He also decided to request next month's resource quota in advance so he could exchange it for more metallurgy liquid. A large amount of brain fluid from mutant beasts and cellular tissue fluid was also needed. Following Nepson's order, several men brought several boxes full of containers with mutant metallurgy liquid. The man in front gave the order to his companion to hurry up since Professor Nepson had ordered a large quantity of metallurgy liquid to be delivered. Nepson injected all the metallurgy liquid into Lu Shang's capsule and now the floor was covered with empty containers. Lu Shang, who had his eyes closed, began absorbing all the liquid again. Nepson's eyes filled with excitement. He wanted the corpse to absorb as much as it could because the more it absorbed, the faster they would be able to awaken the god. Our boy did not move, but deep down he was very happy. This was indeed with the external wounds freshly healed and the 22 immortal cells of the indestructible stellar body. His entire body was in a state of extreme need, and this mutant marrow liquid had arrived just in time. A few weeks later, our boy slowly began to absorb more marrow liquid, causing bubbles to appear inside the capsule. A smile spread across his face as the 23rd immortal cell had already begun to emerge. In these 2 weeks, he had absorbed at least an amount of marrow liquid equivalent to 8 million merits. If the cultivation tank became slightly empty, Nepson would immediately refill it. Nepson stood in front of the capsule, and the room was filled with empty containers of marrow liquid. Lu Shang realized that this professor's resources were absurdly abundant. After this, he was going to obtain dozens of additional immortal cells. Huanin's base was really lined with money, and he had to take full advantage of it. He opened his eyes and began imagining himself sitting in an armchair, wearing sunglasses and smoking a cigar, and behind him were some men prostrated before him. He had abundant resources for training, automatic replenishment if something was missing, and a protected training environment as if it were a sanctuary. For him, this was the best place in the world to train. Lu Shang closed his eyes and couldn't help but smile. He had just perceived something. Huanin's base at most had a level 9 martial arts master in the initial stage. With 22 immortal cells, Lu Shang could defeat Zhao Ji as if he were a dog, and now there was nothing to fear. He decided that now it was time to begin a true training retreat. 1 year later, in the meeting room of the base on Golden Ring Island, the people with the highest rank in the associations gathered and sat at a table. A hologram of a superior was activated. There was a man wearing a black suit with his hands resting on his knee. The white-haired woman wearing glasses crossed her arms and legs, and with a serious expression mentioned that this meeting would focus mainly on 2 topics. This year's World Martial Arts Masters Tournament in news about the new energy crystal deposit. She began to observe the others and explained that it was estimated that if they sent the 20 strongest lords of the seal, they would be able to obtain a much higher quota than in previous years. And this was because the Society of Black Magic had lost half its strength last year in the country of the dragon. It was possible that they might withdraw from the competition, so their share could only increase. The man who wore glasses and had a beard began to stare at the woman and asked if the information was reliable, and whom the Society of Black Magic had faced. The woman remained silent for several seconds. With a sincere gaze, she started showing one finger and revealed that according to reports, it had been a martial arts master who had recently ascended in the country of the dragon. Upon hearing this, everyone's expression changed, their eyes widened in surprise, causing their jaws to drop in shock. They could not believe that there was a new martial arts master in the country of the dragon. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part.
In the meeting room, the man who had a scar on his face placed his hand on the table, turned to his companion, and with a surprised expression mentioned that there was no way there was really a 4th martial saint in the kingdom of the dragon. The other man turned to him and calmly began to converse. The woman interrupted and, with a serious tone, revealed that the supreme martial saint had been gravely injured and fled after being defeated by the new martial saint. There was no doubt about this. The man who wore glasses and had a beard turned to her, extended his hand and with a curious gaze asked if the new martial saint was stronger than the supreme martial saint. He asked if this time the fight for energy crystals would not have unexpected changes. The leader of them, who had his arms crossed, interrupted and while looking at the ground, called everyone's attention and said that this matter was going to be discussed later, mentioning that although Chao-ji had been defeated, he had also used the hidden card given to him by that lord, gravely injuring the new martial saint, whose life or death was now uncertain. The attention of everyone present at the meeting focused on him. They all began observing the hologram and listening attentively without interrupting. The leader of them was a man with a scar on his face, his eyes were shining with confidence. He made it clear that the issue of competition and energy crystals would not be affected by the new martial saint. The woman picked up a tablet and while several holograms were floating around her, using her fingers, she began to navigate through it. Her eyes filled with excitement and she decided it was time to talk about the new energy crystal deposit. She made a holographic map appear and, pointing to a specific spot with her finger, said that the coordinates were north of the great ocean of the Eagle country. The leader's attention fixed on the map and his eyes widened in surprise. With a calm demeanor, he asked if it was the correct location. The woman started looking at the leader and with a confident expression replied that the probability of there being an energy crystal deposit was more than 70%. Upon hearing this, a cheerful smile began to spread across the leader's face. Everyone remained silent for several minutes, waiting for the leader's command. After thinking it through, he gave the order to the king seal from the 1st to the 4th and to the sect seal from the 4th to the 10th to come with him for a moment. The eyes of the man wearing glasses and sporting a beard filled with curiosity. He placed his hand over his chest as a sign of respect and casually asked if he intended to go personally. The leader's attention focused on him and with a calm demeanor, he was honest, explaining that if it truly was a new deposit of energy crystals, both the martial saints of Dark Star and the Black Magic Society would also go. He revealed that if he himself did not accompany them, they would all simply be doomed to die in vain. The man's eyes began to shine with seriousness. He nodded his head upon seeing how astute and concerned the leader was for everyone's safety. Everyone remained silent. And seeing this, the leader closed his eyes and noticing that no one else had anything to say, decided to end the meeting. But just then, someone asked him to wait. A man stood up, raised his hand, and with a sincere voice informed the leader that he had something very important to notify him. The attention of everyone in the meeting focused on the man. They were all curious to know what the man wanted to report. The leader opened his eyes and his gaze filled with curiosity. He began to observe the man and gave him permission to speak. The man was a bald old man, who crumpled some papers in his hand, and while his eyes were shining with rage, he began to shout and with a furious expression denounce the director of the institute, Professor Nepson, for using his name to deduct and extort enormous resources from society for half a year. He revealed an overwhelming fact. The group's flow of funds was already on the verge of completely collapsing. The man crumpled the papers even more forcefully and could not help but clench his teeth tightly due to rage. He was so furious that veins appeared on his face. A man who seemed to be younger than the rest started staring intently at the leader, slammed the table hard, and in an angry tone made it clear that Nepson was a liar since he had told him that he recently had financial difficulties and that the research would be delayed for 3 months. Another man also joined the conversation. He stood up, and while his eyes were shining with hatred, he slammed the table hard with his hand and revealed that Nepson had promised him this was an investment, swearing that in just half a year, profits could multiply by 10. The bald man clenched the papers even harder. He was very furious and and to kill Nepson. All those who were in the room began to talk among themselves, realizing that Nepson's bastard was a liar. They didn't know what to do and knew they were finished since they had lent him a lot of money and resources. The leader and the woman remained silently listening. She closed her eyes and then let out a sigh. A few days ago, she had also received news that Nepson's research funds had already been advanced until next year. As if this weren't enough. In this half year alone, he had submitted for the 4th time an application to conduct experiments with energy crystals, and the amount requested in his latest application had reached 10 grams. One of the men stood up and turned his back on the others. The other man's eyes were filled with despair and hatred because he had lent all his savings to Nepson. The bald man stood up, placed both hands on the table and fixed his attention on the leader. He began shouting like a madman, calling Nepson a greedy and cunning demon, comparing him to the devil. Saying that not even the devil knew as much about how to tempt people as he did. According to those who had been swindled by Nepson, he was just an ordinary person who hadn't even begun learning martial arts, and yet he could control level 7 and 8 masters at will as if it were nothing. To them, this was absurd. More absurd than the president of Lion Country having diarrhea in public. The leader, although somewhat annoyed, simply closed his eyes and decided not to get involved in this. The woman's eyes filled with suspicion. She called everyone's attention and with a calm expression mentioned that something was not right since Nepson was not a warrior. So there was no way he needed so many funds and resources, swearing that once they got to the bottom of the matter, they would make him pay for it. However, even so, this was difficult for her to understand. With a serene expression, the leader crossed his arms and with a penetrating gaze gave Warner the order to personally go look for Nepson and ensure this matter was investigated clearly. After saying this, he ended the meeting. Warner, the man who wore glasses, placed his hand over his chest, bowed his head before his leader as a sign of respect and promised to fulfill his orders. The bald man's eyes were full of despair. He raised his hand and decided to go with him, and if he didn't get his money back, he swore to skin Nepson alive. Once the meeting came to an end, Warner, with a confident expression, began to leave the room. The other men who had been scammed by Nepson were furious and started following Warner. They decided to all go together to pay Nepson a visit. At the same time, in Nepson's laboratory, the floor was littered with empty containers of spinal fluid. Despite the liquid being expensive, it was even spilled on the ground. In front of the capsule, where Liu Sheng was located, stood 2 people who used 20 units of level 8 anomalous metallurgy fluid and 3 units of level 9. They were Nepson and his assistant. While the girl was holding metallurgy liquid on the shoulder, Professor Nepson was connecting the containers to Liu Sheng's capsule with a smile. He mentioned that the concentration of genetic optimizer formula number 5 was still lacking, giving her the order to keep adding. At that moment, a heartbeat was heard, and upon hearing it, Nepson's eyes widened in surprise, leaving him paralyzed with shock. Quickly, he pressed his ear to the capsule and his eyes began to shine with joy. With an excited smile, he asked if she had also heard it. He paid attention and realized that the heart of God had begun to beat. The girl, visibly surprised, placed her hand over her chest and her attention fixed on the capsule, causing her jaw to drop. Her eyes widened in surprise, making her put her hand over her mouth. She used to mock in her diary about Professor Nepson's excessive obsession with ancient myths, but she never imagined that the day would actually come to witness history. When Liu Sheng's corpse was discovered, she saw it with her own eyes. Even Professor Nepson's idea of resurrecting Liu Sheng had been ridiculed by countless people. She would have never thought he would actually succeed. Now Nepson was about to revive a dead god. Nepson stuck to Liu Sheng's capsule, and his eyes widened with excitement. He was as happy as a small child seeing candy for the first time. He couldn't help but smile upon seeing that the wonderful god was awakening. Liu Sheng had given him a revelation and a dream. And now only the moment of the true god's arrival remained. His excitement was interrupted by the sound of an alarm. There was a problem in the laboratory. Nepson detached himself from the capsule and took several steps back. With a confused gaze, he couldn't help but wonder what the problem was, while he was trying to understand the situation. At that moment, the girl, visibly scared, started running towards Nepson and with a gaze full of fear revealed that something bad had happened. Their experiment had been discovered and now many people were forcing their way into the laboratory doors. At the same time, several men arrived at the entrance of the laboratory and one of them began to pound on the door. They were furious, ordering Nepson to open it, calling him a coward. He had the guts to steal their money but not to open the door. They knew Nepson was inside and were going to do everything possible to get in. Nepson's expression changed. He turned towards the door and with a serious look called them short-sighted fools, explaining that there was no greater honor than participating in the resurrection plan of the great God. He was not going to let them ruin everything, as only one step remained for success. Lucia clenched her fist, not knowing what to do. Nepson, visibly desperate, panicked, began pointing at the door and ordered Lucia to activate as soon as possible the most advanced defense system of the laboratory to prevent those bastards from entering at all costs. Lucia placed her hands over her chest and with a worried gaze tried to explain to Nepson about the defense system. But Nepson clenched his teeth and with an enraged look said there was no time to lose, urging her to hurry since once the god awakened, everyone would know that he had been right. Lucia arrived at the defense room. In front of her there was a lever and above it there was a warning sign. With her body trembling with fear, she began to walk toward the lever. This was the defense mechanism designed according to the highest standards, so that the experiment personnel would have time to escape in case of an enemy invasion. Even if it meant destroying the evidence, the protective shield could stop a martial master for 5 minutes. She closed her eyes and without hesitating for a second, began to activate the lever. The members of the organization were no longer going to be able to enter unless they sought out the Divine King, Lord Harold. She decided to stop thinking about it since anyway this served to buy some time. Once the lever was activated, a powerful light began to emerge from the door, blinding everyone. Nepson returned to the room where Lushing's body was, started observing the god's body and with an excited smile, gave Lucia the order to use all available resources, including grams of energy crystal. Following the order, Lucia brought several containers and with a gaze full of admiration, nodded her head. Nepson fell to his knees on the ground and as a faithful believer began to pray. He asked Lushing to wake up at once so that his light would soon illuminate the sky and earth. Our boy, who was inside the capsule, began to absorb the resources with his eyes closed. He was in the dream space and had his fist clenched. In front of him, there was a zombie master with a ponytail on their knees. Lushing didn't even look the zombie in the eyes. He started to use his power and focused, causing green energy to begin emerging from his fist. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, making golden energy appear. He decided it was time to try the method of the 7 mystics of the Founder's Fingers, the technique of the Grand Martial Master of the 7 mystics called Ding Qiaoyu. Lushing began to concentrate energy in his finger. He was using a Grand Master level technique called Skill of the 7 Mystics, pointing at the stars. After taking another deep breath, Lushing struck the air with his middle finger. This technique was so powerful that a burst of energy emerged from his finger, capable of destroying even the strongest opponent. Lushing opened his eyes and a joyful smile appeared on his face, as killing with a single finger felt incredible. He extended his hand and his body began to emit energy. His attention fixed on the energy and it didn't take long for him to realize that he had made a breakthrough, and the Grandmaster technique had fused with his body. While his eyes were shining, Ding Qiaoyu's spirit appeared in front of him. He began to observe it and his eyes filled with joy. She had spent her entire life perfecting this technique, stopping just one step short of perfection. In a sense, her desire was now fulfilled through Lushing, so calling the technique pointing at the stars no longer did it justice. He decided it was better to call it cutting the sky. Lushing summoned a small red flame in his hand. He started observing it and a smile appeared on his face since cutting the sky sounded good. It had style and plenty of class. In these 6 months, he had obtained too much. In the real world, he absorbed resources without limits, and in dreams, he obtained advanced techniques. He had completely defeated all the great masters of martial arts street, accumulating a total of 41 manifestations of martial Tao. In the Wheel of Destiny, he had ignited 98 flames of willpower, achieving absolute perfection and spiritual power. He clenched his fist and his eyes began to shine with confidence since this space no longer had stronger opponents. He had completed the game in its entirety. In front of him, there was an empty alley with everything destroyed. Lushing stretched his legs and stood still. His eyes filled with suspicion as he turned around. He went on alert since in the real world someone was trying to interrupt. He could no longer keep hiding it. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, please subscribe our channel and like and share the video. Welcome to our channel. Within the space of dreams, everything was destroyed. The entire city was now in ruins due to the new attack that our boy had learned. He extended his hand and began to ponder silently, not knowing who wanted to interrupt his training session. Lu Shang remained calm, and his attention was fixed on his hands. He could no longer keep hiding his power. But he was satisfied since he had enjoyed enough. During this year, he did not remember how much metal or illiquid he had absorbed or how many high-energy substances he had consumed. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with confidence, and a smile appeared on his face. The Blood Master had been condensing and fragmenting ceaselessly. Immortal cells had grown frantically. And now their number had reached 183. Lu Shang began to use his power, making martial fire emerge from the palm of his hand. His attention fixed on it. He had 9 times more immortal cells than a year ago. Things had changed a lot. Before he could not face a martial saint, but now he was going to be able to kill them without problems. He began to imagine his body, with his heart shining intensely. His body had also reached its limit. The stellar patterns covered his entire body. If he wanted to continue obtaining more immortal cells, he needed to reach the 9th level and use the power of the great force of heaven and earth to break through the limitations of the current phase of the stellar immortal body. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with calmness. He put his hand on his chin and started to ponder. Reaching level 9 was going to be a bit complicated since currently he couldn't even fully merge his essence, energy, and spirit into a single core. Much less could he construct the Dharma manifestation or create his own mark of the martial path. His accumulation was massively excessive. He began to imagine Martial Saint Chaoji dressed as a pizza maker. He clenched his fists and, with a serious gaze, started kneading the dough. Lu Shang observed him with a curious expression and made a comparison. For Chaoji, reaching level 9 was easy. He only had to gather 3 lumps of flour dough. Whereas our boy would have to work much harder. 3 giant suns at high temperatures surrounded by martial fire appeared in front of our boy. He had to compress 3 giant suns and fuse them into one without increasing its volume. It could be said that without flames of millions of degrees high temperature and pressure 100,000 times greater, it would be something completely impossible to achieve. Lu Shang's eyes filled with rage, causing him to clench his teeth and fist tightly. He began to gaze at his fist, and after thinking it over several times, he came to the conclusion that he needed pressure, an incomparable pressure. Only under an unprecedented high-pressure battle could he complete this step. But there was a problem. This type of pressure could not be provided by a simple martial saint. While he was deep in thought, something caught his attention, making him curious. When he looked to the side, he saw Lu Xier and Professor Nepson talking among themselves. The two seemed nervous. Lu Shang's gaze fixed on Nepson, and it didn't take long for him to realize that Nepson had reached his limit. This was the right moment to go out in search of some pressure because, after all, it was time to grant the devoted Nepson his ultimate dream, the arrival of a god. At the doors of the laboratory, Someone launched a powerful burst of energy which hit the door directly. But the attack had no effect and the door remained intact. One of the men had fired a burst of energy with the help of an advanced weapon. They were furious to see that old Nepson was rebelling and had dared to activate the highest level defense mechanism. They were so furious that they swore to skin him alive. The bald man's eyes were full of rage and despair. A man with blue hair approached him, began observing him, and with a worried expression asked what to do now. Far from giving up, the bald man stood firm, and with a furious gaze decided to contact Mr. Harold, since only he had the key to the laboratory. She was sure that as soon as they obtained the key, they would be able to open the damn door. This made the eyes of the others begin to shine with hope. They clenched their fists and couldn't help but smile because they were determined to make Nepson pay for having scammed them. 10 minutes ago, 2 individuals surrounded by energy arrived on the island, landing in the mountains. The woman we saw earlier in the meeting room was also at the place. She placed her hands on her abdomen. And as the smoke was dispersing with a respectful she welcomed the lords, explaining that Marshal Saint Harold had already taken all the elite combat forces. Now only second-line forces remained. Someone wearing black boots stepped forward and praised the woman named Cadiz for having done a good job this time. 2 men emerged, one of them was muscular, had vampire teeth and black angel wings. With an arrogant smile, he cracked his fingers, showing that he was ready. Next to him was a man with orange hair who was wearing sunglasses and calmly smoking a cigarette. The muscular man's eyes widened with joy. He couldn't help but smile since Lei's plan had worked. Lei began to walk toward him, extended his hand, and with a proud smile mentioned that the first collaboration between Darkstar and the Black Magic Society had been a complete success. And by the time Harold reacted, the entire Golden Ring Island would already be a pile of rubble. Recapping what had happened, in the assassination operation against the Marshall Street. Lushan, with a piercing expression, our boy had massacred everyone who stood in his way, causing more than half of the main members of the Black Magic Society to lose their lives. Instead of waiting for Ringmark and Darkstar to divide up the benefits in the battle for the crystals, it was better to take the initiative, attacking first and leaving Ringmark's main base in ruins. The additional gains could be split into a 20 minutes 80 portion with Darkstar, and this way, not only would losses be minimized, but even a small profit could be obtained. As for the news about the new energy crystal deposit, it was also intentionally leaked as part of the plan. The 2 men began to walk toward the mountains. And Lei decided it was time to completely destroy Ringmark's base. A wicked smile appeared on his face. His eyes were full of anticipation as he couldn't wait to see Harold's expression of anger and surprise when he returned and saw the rubble of the island. At the same time, inside the laboratory, Lucia went to the security room, and using her knowledge, she used the computer to activate the monitoring system. The life bar of the door was decreasing faster than before. Her attention was fixed on the screen, and with an uncertain gaze, she revealed that they had gone to look for the key that Lord Harold had, asking what to do now. While Lu Sheng was sleeping inside the capsule, Professor Nepson crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and began to think about what to do now since there wasn't much time. Lu Sheng continued sleeping and absorbing the metallary liquid. Nepson turned around and his attention focused on Lu Sheng. He started sweating and his eyes widened in desperation. He didn't know what to do since he had bet everything, and each time the heartbeat of the god grew stronger. Consumed by despair, Nepson knelt before Lu Sheng and began to pray, asking him to please wake up. Several minutes passed and Lu Sheng did not wake up. Nepson raised his head and started sweating like crazy. With a sincere expression, he asked God to reveal to the world the truths buried by time. The integrity bar of the defense system was dropping rapidly. It was now at 15%. Lu Sheng's eyes were full of worry. She approached Nepson, placed her hands on his shoulder, and with a concerned gaze, revealed that the protection shield's time was about to run out. Only 15% of the remaining time was left. Upon hearing this, Nepson's eyes widened in surprise and fear, believing that all his effort had been for nothing and that everything was going to end here. But then, the crystal of the capsule began to crack, and upon feeling this, Lu Sheng's and Nepson's attention focused on it. Both were open-mouthed and somewhat surprised. The crystal of the capsule broke into pieces, causing the liquid to spill outside. Lu Sheng, who had his eyes closed, slowly began to make movements, until several seconds later, he opened his eyes and started to show a penetrating gaze. With a calm expression, he extended his hand and began to use his power, making energy appear in the palm of his hand. He stepped out of the capsule and used the manifestation of energy, transforming the energy into clothing. With a smile, he began to walk toward Lucia and Nepson. Their jaws dropped, and their gazes fixed on Lu Sheng, causing their eyes to widen in surprise upon seeing that the god had finally resurrected. Still with his mouth open, Nepson approached Lu Sheng and welcomed him, revealing that now that the great god had awakened, his glory was going to illuminate the entire world. Lu Sheng walked past him, began observing him, and with a serene gaze praised Nepson for having done a good job, revealing that he knew everything he had done for him. Nepson clasped his hands together, and his eyes widened with joy. He couldn't help but smile and feel excited upon realizing he had been recognized by God, thinking that now his entire life had been worth it. Lu Sheng took out an energy crystal, and while holding it in his hand, he turned to Nepson and asked with a smile if this thing was called an energy crystal. Nepson and Lucia knelt before Lu Sheng as a sign of respect. While our boy was examining the energy crystal, Nepso N explained that it was a treasure valuable enough to drive a level 9 martial master crazy. Its energy was immensely powerful, and the small piece Lu Sheng held in his hands was equivalent to a small nuclear reactor. Lucia rested her hands on her knees and remained listening in astonishment, silently. Lu Sheng turned around and with a calm and grateful expression, thanked Nepson for the explanation, and then put the energy crystal in his pocket. It was no wonder that he had gained 7 immortal cells at once. For him, energy crystals were something interesting. He decided to keep one as a sample. Lu Sheng approached the table, and while grabbing the phone, he thanked Nepson for waking him from his lethargy. He planned to use the phone to send them a message. Nepson and Lucia, who were still on their knees, became somewhat curious, and the professor mentioned that it was an honor for him, and also asked if they could know his name. Our boy grabbed the phone and after unlocking it, started writing a message, revealing that his name was Lu Sheng. Lucia's eyes filled with suspicion. She leaned toward Nepson's ear and mentioned that this god was somewhat strange. Nepson snapped out of his trance, turned to Lucia, and with a confused expression asked what she was talking about. As if using the phone wasn't suspicious enough, Lu Sheng also posed and took a selfie. Nepson and Lucia's attention was fixed on him. She made it clear that Lu Sheng had nothing ancient about him, as he was even using a phone and taking selfies with total ease. She asked if a newly resurrected god would really know how to do this. Nepson caught Lu Sheng's attention, filling his mind with curiosity. It didn't take long for him to realize that something strange was happening outside. His eyes began to shine with seriousness. He turned toward the door, and with a piercing gaze revealed that there were 2 level 9 martial masters massacring the martial artists, and another level 9 martial master was heading toward the island from very far away. Upon hearing this, Lucia and Nepson couldn't help but go into shock. Both began to feel fear. Behind them was the laboratory door. At that moment, an alarm started to sound. Lucia activated her watch, causing a hologram to appear. One of the superiors informed Lucia about the bad news. The second royal seal had betrayed the organization. Darkstar and the Black Magic Society had joined forces to attack Golden Ring Island, and all bearers of the royal seals and monarch seals had died in combat, urging her and Nepson to escape quickly as the island was going to fall. Upon hearing this, Nepson's eyes widened in fear. He couldn't believe this had happened. Lucia got nervous, and told Nepson that they had to leave since they couldn't allow so many years of research to fall into the hands of the enemy. Nepson's eyes were shining with determination. He turned towards her, asking why they should flee. He approached Lu Sheng, joined his hands and with a nervous and desperate expression, begged the holy god to save the island of the Golden Ring. Lu Sheng began to observe him with a curious expression in silence. Without wasting time, he started walking towards the laboratory exit, asking if this was Nepson's first wish. The professor turned to Lu Sheng and his eyes widened in confusion. He was paralyzed, not knowing what to say. Our boy turned to him and with a confident expression promised to fulfill Nepson's wish. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, please subscribe our channel and like and share the video. Welcome to our channel. It was daytime, and somewhere on the island was located the Great Hall. Warner, subordinate of the Marshal Saint Harold, arrived at the island. But as soon as he arrived, someone gave him a powerful blow to the stomach, making his body shoot backward, leaving a trail of energy. The blow was so powerful that he couldn't help but open his mouth and start bleeding. Warner's body fell several meters back, he placed his hand on his chest, and his eyes widened in fear. He finally realized that the Society of Black Magic had allied with Darkstar from the beginning. Just before Warner could have another thought, someone attacked with a powerful energy projectile, piercing Warner's head as if it were a melon and thus killing him instantly. It was the man with angel wings that we saw before. He had fired an energy projectile from his finger and now smoke was coming out of it. Warner's body fell to the ground. The man closed his eyes and could not help but clench his teeth since according to him they were very weak. He and Lei were in front of the Great Hall and behind them was a mountain of corpses. Just then, a powerful thunder descended from the sky onto the island. Feeling this, the man with angel wings turned around and his gaze fixed on the thunder. He could not help but smile upon seeing that he had returned. Lei started adjusting his glasses with his finger and an excited smile spread across his face upon seeing that Harold had returned. A powerful martial spirit surrounded by a powerful energy and Harold's men began to run toward the Great Hall. Within the spirit was the marshal. He started pointing at Lei with his finger and could not help but become enraged upon seeing that they had massacred his men and destroyed part of the island. It did not take him long to realize that Darkstar and the Black Magic Society had joined forces. He was so furious that even if he killed them 1,000 times, it would not be enough. Upon hearing this, the man with angel wings began to gaze at the ground and couldn't help but smile. He used his power, causing his to transform into a powerful martial spirit with wings. He crossed his arms and, with a smile, mocked Harold, saying that everyone knew how to talk, challenging him to come and try to kill him if he had the guts. Consumed by hatred, Harold did not hold back and commanded his martial spirit to attack. While the spirit's eyes were glowing, it clenched its fists and began charging at the spirit. The spirit of the man with angel wings also started advancing quickly, ready to attack. The fists of the powerful martial spirits clashed against each other, creating a great wave of energy capable of blinding anyone and shattering the ground into pieces. Lei took off his glasses and his gaze fixed on Harold. His eyes began to shine with seriousness. He knew that he also had to fight because otherwise his friend was going to say that he had obtained credits without making any effort. Lei used his power, causing energy to begin to emerge from his body. His energy also manifested and transformed into a martial spirit, which began to stare at Harold. With a calm gaze, Lei began to point towards the sky and concentrated, releasing energy. He used his power, forming a stellar constellation in the sky, causing his martial spirit to raise its hand. And not long after, martial fire began to emerge from its body. The spirit began to point at Harold, causing a powerful energy to emerge from the stars and strike against Harold's martial spirit. It knelt down and put its arms over its head, beginning to roar in pain. Harold's men were also injured and 2 of them were lying on the ground. One of them, who had bruises on his face, propped himself up on the ground with the help of his arms and his gaze fixed on Lei's martial spirit. His eyes widened in surprise and fear. 2 martial saints were attacking Harold at the same time. So he thought that this time Golden Ring Island was going to be destroyed. The other man couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly and feel furious. Harold, who had his arms over his head and was defending himself from the attack, started observing Lei and soon realized that this was not good. One of the subordinates that Harold had brought clenched his fist in, with a desperate gaze, explained that the battle of the level 9 warriors was beyond their reach. Asking what to do now. They felt totally useless. Lei's gaze fixed on them. He extended his hand toward them and with a smile mentioned that now that they had come, they should also stay. He used his power, making his martial spirit attack with a powerful slap, which crushed 2 of the men in the blink of an eye, without giving them a chance to react. The attack was so powerful that they lost their lives. The remaining men fell on their butts to the ground and their eyes filled with fear. Now that Harold was busy fighting against two martial saints, everyone else was going to be massacred. Harold began to stare at Lei and with a furious expression revealed that he knew Darkstar and the Black Magic Society were secretly working together. He asked if they weren't ashamed to attack his base. While Lei's body was surrounded by energy, he extended his hand and his attention fixed on Harold. And with a smile he mentioned that Harold should remember that if one has the advantage to attack, one must do it to take the lead, revealing that even if today they couldn't kill him. After eliminating all the high-level warriors on the island, Harold would not be able to continue fighting for the energy crystals. At that moment, Lei's eyes widened in surprise as something caught his attention. Lu Shang left the laboratory and arrived at the Great Hall, which was filled with corpses, with a confident smile. Our boy began to walk toward Lei and the others. Lu Shang's eyes were shining with confidence, and his gaze was fixed on Harold. Lei couldn't help but feel confused upon seeing an Oriental on the Golden Ring Island, nor did he know why he was so confident, or why he wasn't afraid. Lu Shang did not change his attitude, which was an insult to Lei. He used his power, causing the hand of his martial spirit to begin descending upon Lu Shang. Our boy remained calm, started observing the spirit, and did not move. Just before the spirit could attack, Lu Shang raised a finger and placed it in front, making an intense glow emerge from it. Without much effort, our boy blocked the powerful attack of a martial saint using a finger, leaving everyone in shock. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine and his gaze fixed on Lei, with an arrogant smile. He asked if this wasn't interesting. Seeing that Lu Shang had blocked the attack of a martial saint with a simple finger, the jaw of martial saint Harold dropped and his eyes filled with surprise. According to him, this was impossible. Lei, who was inside the martial spirit, was speechless, and while he was trying to process the situation, Lu Shang moved like lightning and in an instant appeared in front of him and began to stare at him. Just before Lei had time to react, Lu Shang reached out toward him and used his power, shattering his martial spirit into pieces as if it were glass. Lu Shang's attack struck Lei's chest, sending his body flying out of the martial spirit. His eyes widened in fear and confusion as he did not know how it was possible for someone so strong to exist. The spirit of the man with angel wings was flying, while on the other side, Harold's was crouching on the ground. Lu Shang's attack was so powerful that Lei's body was sent flying several kilometers backward and crashed forcefully into the sea. Lu Shang's body, who was flying, began to emit golden energy. The muscular man's gaze fixed on him. He was speechless upon seeing that Lei had been defeated with a single blow. With an expression full of fear, he asked who Lu Shang was and where he had come from. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with hatred. He turned towards them and, with a piercing gaze, proclaimed himself as God. Upon hearing this, the two martial saints began to observe Lu Shang in silence, creating tension. The attention of Harold's subordinates, who were still alive, was fixed on Lu Shang. Their eyes widened in surprise and confusion. They were in shock, not knowing if he was really a god. They could not believe that Professor Nepson's ridiculous deception was real. Professor Nepson also left the laboratory and arrived at the Great Hall. He placed a hand on the pillar and began to observe Lu Shang. He was open-mouthed upon seeing that Lu Shang had defeated a martial saint with a single blow. According to him, this god had great power. The devout Nepson fell to his knees on the ground and extended his hands. For him, Lu Shang was the true god, and under his power, even the martial saints would disappear until they turned to ashes. Lu Shang was equal to the god he had seen in his dreams. Lucia appeared behind him, knelt before Lu Shang, and her eyes filled with amazement upon seeing that this was real and not an illusion. She was seeing a god with her own eyes. The man with angel wings and Harold deactivated their martial spirits and their attention fixed on Lu Shang. Both were in shock, not knowing what to do. Lu Shang turned towards them, began to show a finger, and with a penetrating gaze made it clear that of the two, only one could live. Upon hearing this, Harold's and the man with angel wings' eyes widened in surprise and confusion. They could not believe that someone dared to mock them in this way. Consumed by hatred, the man with angel wings clenched his teeth, thinking that this was a bad joke. Then he extended his hand and began to gather energy. His eyes began to shine with determination. Once he finished gathering energy, he extended his hand towards Lu Shang and launched a powerful energy arrow at him, revealing that the one who was going to die was Lu Shang. As the energy arrow was slowly approaching, our boy remained silent. Lu Shang prepared to counterattack, extended his hand towards him and used the technique he had learned called cutting the sky, causing a powerful golden energy to emerge from his hand, sweeping away the energy arrow. Just before the man with angel wings had time to react, Lu Shang's attack reached him and cut his waist in half, separating his body into two. His eyes widened in fear, as he did not know how it was possible that someone like him had been defeated with a single attack. Then, the powerful martial spirit of Master Ding Kai Yu appeared in the sky and slowly began to fade away. Harold fell to his knees on the ground, lowered his head before Lu Shang, clenched his teeth, and showed respect for him, explaining that now that one of them had been eliminated, there was no need to kill him as well. Lu Shang descended to the ground and began to observe Harold in silence. With a cold gaze, he made it clear that even level 9 martial masters were still human and therefore could feel fear. Revealing that in reality, he never intended to kill Harold since after all, he had been taking advantage of Wanayan for so long. If he killed the leader, it would be too cruel. Harold and his men knelt down and bowed their heads before Lu Shang. With a piercing expression, Lu Shang began to observe them and explained that now he finally understood why when the Supreme Martial Master appeared, those from the army knelt before him. If the very sky suddenly descended in front of you, you wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure and would choose to prostrate yourself, and now Lu Shang was the sky. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, please subscribe our channel and like and share the video. Welcome to our channel. A few hours later, Lu Sheng and Harold went to the conference room of the base. Our boy was sitting and browsing his mobile phone, while on the other side, Harold was standing next to him. Lu Sheng made a video call with his sister King. She started showing 2 fingers, closed her eyes and with a kind smile mentioned that she hoped to see him again soon, promising that he was going to be greatly surprised since she had almost finished muscle and bone training and would soon ascend to level 4. Lu Sheng began observing his sister, and his eyes widened with joy. With a proud smile, he said that he knew how incredible his little sister was. He asked her to give the phone to their parents since he wanted to talk to them. King nodded and handed the mobile phone to her father. Upon seeing Lu Sheng, the mother's eyes filled with tears and happiness. With a worried smile, she admitted that she was somewhat concerned about him. She was happy to see that he was doing well and asked him to finish his mission quickly and returned to them since everyone missed him. The father, who was behind her, closed his eyes and began to show a smile. Lu Sheng remained silent, watching his parents. His eyes started to shine. With a smile, he promised to return as soon as possible, asking them to take care of themselves. After talking with them, Lu Sheng ended the video call and remained looking at the phone screen in silence. The eyes of Marshal Saint Harold, who was standing beside him, widened in confusion. His attention was fixed on Lu Sheng's mobile phone, and he began to sweat without knowing what was happening. He started staring at Lu Sheng, and with a curious gaze, he realized that the supposed god had parents who were no more than 50 years old, and his younger sister was not yet of age. He did not know how old this god really was. With a smile, Lu Sheng continued browsing his mobile phone. The jaw of poor Marshal Saint Harold dropped, and his eyes expanded in fear. He simply could not believe it. Lu Sheng was precisely a young man whose age did not even reach that of his great-great-grandson. Just a few hours ago, our boy had instantly and effortlessly killed 2 level 9 martial saints, directly eliminating the leaders of 2 major mysterious organizations in the world. His eyes widened in surprise, and he couldn't help but sweat profusely. He knew that if he spread this news, no one would believe him. He used to mock the new rumors about the martial saint of the Dragon Kingdom, realizing that Lu Sheng was the new martial saint. He began to imagine Lu Sheng with his hands in his pants pockets, smiling and surrounded by an intense martial energy. He had killed 3 martial saints. A question came to Harold's mind. He didn't know how many more level 9 warriors existed in this world. For him, this was terrifying. While Harold was lost in his thoughts, Lu Sheng was on a video call with his friends. With a cheerful expression, He started pointing at Harold with his finger and decided to say goodbye to them since there were still people waiting for him to discuss matters. Upon hearing this, Harold came out of his trance, and his eyes filled with surprise and confusion. He could not believe that someone as strong as Lu Sheng really existed in this world. Lu Sheng put the mobile phone in front of Harold and focused on his face. He closed his eyes and, with a nervous smile, began to wave at Lu Sheng's friends. Lu Sheng turned off the mobile phone and placed it on the table. Then he turned to Harold, and his eyes filled with gratitude. He began to observe Harold and, with a smile, thanked him for his cooperation. Harold lowered his head before him and mentioned that it was an honor for him to serve Lu Sheng. Our boy took out the sample of energy crystal that he had in his pocket, began to observe it with a curious expression. He decided that it was time to talk about their matter. He asked if Harold knew what this thing was. The energy crystal began to shine intensely. Harold's attention fixed on it and his eyes widened in surprise. He began to sweat and ponder in silence. He placed his hand over his chest, closed his eyes again, lowered his head before him, and with a sincere expression asked how many energy crystals Lu Sheng needed. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng turned to him and with a curious gaze asked how many energy crystals Harold could obtain. Harold's eyes began to shine with seriousness and in a sincere tone. He hesitated for a second until he revealed that he could obtain 1 kilogram of energy crystals. Upon hearing this, an excited smile spread across Lu Sheng's face and his eyes began to shine with joy. Originally, he had only asked out of pure curiosity and did not expect Harold to think he was extorting him. He was happy because he had managed to obtain many resources from Harold and his organization. Lu Sheng's body began to emit orange martial energy. His attention fixed on her, old and he couldn't help but smile. A few grams of energy crystals could make his immortal cells progress by leaps and bounds. With a kilogram, he feared it would be more than enough to reach the true limit of his level 8 stellar body. While Harold had his head lowered, Lu Sheng placed his hand under his chin and began to ponder. A question came to his mind. He didn't know if he looked like someone so terrifying that Harold thought he was a villain. Lu Sheng snapped out of his trance, turned to Harold, and with a cheerful smile mentioned that it seemed like he had many energy crystals. Harold raised his head and his eyes widened in surprise and his jaw dropped, revealing that he actually did not have many energy crystals. In these 100 years, he had only accumulated a few 100 grams. But since Lu Sheng had killed the leaders of Dark Star and the Black Magic Society, if he took over their territories, he would be able to gather a kilogram of energy crystals. With a curious expression, Lu Sheng asked if the production of energy crystals was really so scarce. Harold's expression changed and his eyes filled with seriousness. He extended his hand and explained that although finding energy crystal deposits was rare, there was no shortage. He began to imagine a man with 3 eyes, with a gaze full of fear. Harold mentioned that every time energy crystals were produced, the 9% had to be given to the guides. And only 10% of what was produced was distributed among all the martial saints of the world. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng became curious. He started staring at Harold and asked who the guides were. His eyes widened in fear and seriousness. He began to sweat, not knowing if the guides were the deity that had appeared in his battle against Zhao Ji. Harold extended his hands, approached Lu Sheng, and with a sincere expression mentioned that it seemed Lu Sheng should not know this, and also that the guides had probably not yet had time to contact Lu Sheng. Our boy began to observe Harold and listen attentively in silence. Harold started to imagine a group of men wearing masks, and revealed that the job of the guides was to register the number of level 9 martial saints and, along the way, collect energy crystals. He had discovered this secret in his 7th year as a martial saint. With a calm gaze, Lu Sheng interrupted him by giving him the order to get to the point. Harold extended his hand and began to imagine a powerful hooded deity. His eyes started to shine seriously as he explained that the guides were powerful martial artists from planets with advanced civilizations, possessing power far greater than that of a level 9 warrior. No one knew if they were level 10 or even higher. They had appeared since year 1 of the martial path, leading the rise of martial arts. When in the Blue Star 9 level martial saints emerged, the guides descended to establish a new world order. organizing the warriors of each nation and collecting energy crystals together. The guides never intervened in conflicts between nations, except when too many 9-level martial saints fell. And only then would they descend to impose punishments. Lu Sheng remained calm and with a curious gaze asked if the guides were going to intervene if 3 martial saints died. Harold's eyes began to shine. He started staring at Lu Sheng and replied no, since the last time the guides intervened was in the battle between the Dragon Kingdom and Lion, with more than 10 martial saints dead and injured. In fact, the supervision of the guides over them was quite lax. They only cared about 3 things. The first was the issue of energy crystal production. If production decreased, the guides would get angry, and in severe cases the martial saints had to pay out of their own pockets to meet the quota. The second was the invasion of exotic beasts. They had to suppress beast invasions below a safe threshold. If disturbances greater than expected occurred, the martial saints were obligated to intervene to repel the beasts. Harold's eyes widened in fear, making him sweat. He approached Lu Sheng and revealed that without the permission of the guides, the appearance of a martial arts expert of level 9 or higher was not allowed on the day. Assumed that this was established to facilitate resource collection for the guides, revealing that their planet was called a first-level resource star. Lu Sheng crossed his arms and began to gaze at the ground in silence. His eyes started to shine with hatred as this coincided with what he had seen in the dream space. He began to imagine a powerful deity controlling the world. Without level 10 martial artists, the limit of local martial power was maintained. An advanced civilization led the martial development of the indigenous, facing invasions from exotic beasts while collecting rare and valuable resources from the planet, all while restricting the birth of strong warriors. The gaze of our boy fixed on Harold. With a serious expression, he asked what they should do when a warrior capable of surpassing level 9 was born. Harold froze, thinking in silence, and his eyes widened in surprise. With an uncertain expression, he said that he did not know. With a serious expression, he explained that the path to ascend beyond level 9 was in the hands of the guides. Without help, there was no way to break that limit. Lu Sheng put his hand under his chin, closed his eyes, and began to think in silence. Then his eyes started to shine with determination, and he asked when the guides were coming next time. With an uncertain expression, Harold looked away and explained that the guides were going to arrive in a few months, but he was not sure about the details. Each time they were received by a representative of the martial saints from the World Martial Arts Association. But it was certain that they always came after the collection of energy crystals at the World Masters Congress. Lu Sheng started to gaze at the ground with a confused expression and asked if the World Masters Conference had been created for the purpose of collecting energy crystals and distributing quotas. Harold began to look down at the ground in silence. With a sincere gaze, he replied yes, explaining that any warrior who had the level of martial saint could attend. Dark Star and Black Magic Society only wanted more shares, and for this reason, they had joined forces to attack Harold, since after all, if there was one less person sharing the cake, the others could eat a little more. Lu Sheng's eyes filled with tranquility. He turned to Harold and asked if many martial saints attended. With a serene gaze, Harold began to imagine the powerful martial saints and revealed that it could be said that all the martial saints who could attend would be present. Lu Sheng rested his hand on the table and stood up with an excited smile. He asked if he could accompany Harold when the time came. Harold began to observe Lu Sheng in silence until he placed his hand on his chest and his eyes widened with joy. With a smile, he mentioned that it would be an honor for him. He couldn't believe that someone as powerful as Lu Sheng wanted to attend and support his association, realizing that this time the distribution quota for his association was going to be higher than ever. Lu Sheng turned toward him and, with a smile, decided not to take Harold's. He only asked to be given Dark Stars and Black Magic Society's share. He also asked him to take good care of Nepson for him and not shatter his sweet illusions, since Lu Sheng still had a few more wishes left to grant him. Harold joined his hands in joy and with a smile accepted. Lu Sheng turned his back and slowly began to walk away, deciding that it was time to leave. Harold panicked, reached out to him, and with a curious gaze, asked what his current strength. Lu Sheng kept walking until he stopped, turned his head, and while his eyes were shining, he smiled and replied that he was a level 8 warrior. Harold closed his eyes and sighed, as he thought Lu Sheng was a level 10 warrior. But then, his jaw dropped and he transformed into Usopp from One Piece upon seeing that Lu Sheng was a level 8 warrior. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, please subscribe our channel and like and share the video. Welcome to our channel.